Member for Denry South, we do apologize, but you may proceed now.
The finish, all right. Unfortunately, it's good. Yeah, I didn't see. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, after 13 years, the Phoenix is still stuck in transition, echoing the sentiments of ground control at the Space Center. Houston, we have got a problem. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, it is acknowledged that responding to the aftermath of any disaster is not an easy task. Chaos and confusion would normally follow thereafter. Time is of the essence. The solutions may not be easily available. However, if we remain focused and stay on course, we will eventually get to the finish line. Mr. Speaker, just imagine in 2010, if any of the honorable members here had a baby. 13 years from now, that baby will be close to leaving secondary school education. So it is such a long time, Mr. Speaker. This project is ongoing, and we must bring an end to it as soon as possible. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that the implementation of prudent planning and decision-making process are the only mechanisms that have the capacity to generate an acceptable and timely solution. Mr. Speaker, for us to move forward, we must pay attention to the historical background information that will reveal how things unfolded before we repeat our past mistakes. For it is Albert Einstein who has cautioned us that it is insane to do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Mr. Speaker, as I reflect upon the St. Jude Hospital situation, I am cognizant of a young man named Danny Thomas who in the 1950s felt desperate and hopeless in his entertainment career. However, he prayed to St. Jude Thaddeus, the patron saint of hopeless causes, to help him find his way in life, and he will build St. Jude a shrine. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, similarly to Mr. Thomas, the people of St. Lucia, the residents of the South, do feel hopeless when it comes to the state of healthcare and the physical infrastructure used to deliver it. We have patiently accepted and endured this inferior quality facility for far too long. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say that in Creole. C'est janvier fort avec ces l'autre communes qu'on laboui, Soiseil, Mikou, Denui, car espérer pour un chaitan, pour l'hôpital qui yo tout deserve, et puis yo ha encore yo ada en situation côté yo pas ni de courage encore, yo pas ni de patience encore, et yo ga dit nous pour faire ça nous ça pour délivrer l'hôpital là by yo because it's important pour ces communes. Mr. Speaker, enough is enough. It is shameful, hurtful, and sad that after 13 years, the people of the South and the healthcare professionals are made to suffer from shifts in policy, poor decision-making, major errors, omissions, budget constraints, and change of governments. Mr. Speaker, I am mindful of the mission statement of St. Jude's as it reads, to promote, restore, and maintain the health of all patients by providing quality, timely, efficient, and effective services through a cadre of competent staff within an enabling environment. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the enabling environment component of this mission statement has been absent for the past 13 years. Mr. Speaker, Like many patriotic St. Lucians, it is extremely troubling when considering why are we still in this mess when the original hospital was almost 50% complete 6 years ago. Mr. Speaker, I am certain if we were to pose the question to a 5-year-old child and ask, what should we do? Finish the building that is 50% completed, or abandon the building and demolish it and start all over? Mr. Speaker, I'm certainly sure, and I'm quite confident that the 5-year-old would respond by saying, finish what we started. Simple common sense, Mr. Speaker. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, the 5-year-old would recognize the initial effort that has gone into the process thus far. He or she would be curious to see the product finished in the shortest possible time. That child would want to enjoy the buildings immediately because time is of the essence. That child, Mr. Speaker, would be conscious of the fact that he would be wasting resources if they had abandoned incomplete buildings. Mr. Speaker, that child would recognize that it is cheaper to finish the building instead of building a new one that would exceed the size of the original structure. Mr. Speaker, that child would also have recognized the level of waste that have created in our real estate market. The presence of abandoned buildings negatively impacts the value of the neighboring properties, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, such an event will only make the people of Beaufort poorer and impact our economy negatively because of the low asset values that will be generated in the surrounding area. Mr. Speaker, the 5-year-old child would have recognized that if they finished the building as opposed to building a new one, they would have saved money which can be diverted to doing other essential things. I suspect that. Mr. Speaker, in the decision-making process, that child has simply exhibited the application of common sense, something that seemed to be absent in 2017 when the UWP administration abruptly stopped the reconstruction process. Mr. Speaker, the UWP administration in 2016 commissioned an audit and evaluation of the buildings forming part of the reconstruction of St. Jude. Mr. Speaker, the interim audit report informs us that the ongoing works at St. Jude could have progressed after 2016. Mr. Speaker, while the consultants expressed concerns about the omission of adequate spaces for running, but more importantly, accessing services within the building, the consultants have expressly stated, and I quote, a great value present in the works completed to date and believe the project is salvageable and could be converted into a facility that can properly serve the needs of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, that information can be found on page 13, paragraph 4 of the Review Committee report of 28 October 2021. Document of the House. Mr. Speaker, the interim report informs us that out of the 25 buildings under reconstruction and the 8 other structures proposed, the overall rate of progress on the site was assessed at 50% in 2016. Mr. Speaker, based on the consultant's findings, it is safe to conclude that the buildings were fit for purpose and there was no justification to abandon or demolish the existing structures in their entirety. Mr. Speaker, it is generally accepted and practiced that where buildings are structurally sound but deficient in minor end-user requirements, the structures are adapted to suit, not discarded. Right. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, we have seen the former UWP administration selecting the latter option. Mr. Speaker, the former Minister for Health, Senator Mary Isaac, is on record as she announced on September 14, 2017, that a redevelopment project might very well be discontinued. She stated, and I quote, I wish I could speak like her, Mr. Speaker. I believe that the recommendation to demolish the hospital and start all over really needs to be considered seriously. Although we are very aware of the pressure that we currently have on the structure where St. Jude is housed, we may not have any choice in the matter. End of quote. According to the former minister, Mr. Speaker, I quote, the newly constructed building would not be fit to house a hospital. Mr. Speaker, that information is published also in the Star newspaper in September 2017 and was republished on October 20, 2021. Mr. Speaker, the very bad decisions by the former UWP administration to halt and abandon the works on the structures that started in 2010 has cost this country time, money, and precious lives. Projet l'hôpital là qui commencé en 2010 a causé gouvernement Saint-Lucie pour dépenser passer 300 millions de dollars et puis l'hôpital là pas fini. Et ma copine en place qu'a dépensé $300 million pour faire l'hôpital et puis juste toujours l'hôpital là pas fini. Mais je voulais dire gouvernement ça là yo créé gouvernement Saint-Louis le parti a un gouvernement qui a mis des gens avant premier nous ca regarder ça nous ça fait pour nous make sure that nous bail ces janvier fois à l'hôpital yo. We must consider the opportunity cost of spending money on a new complex box that cannot be utilized as opposed to spending the same money and finishing the hospital that was already 50% complete. Mr. Speaker, the knock-on effect of this bad decision is felt in the South every day. The people of Dennery, Micoud, Vieux-Fort, Labrie, and Choiseul are left to postpone surgeries because of the shortages of bed space or surgical theater. Mr. Speaker, the implication of these bad decisions means that vulnerable patients who may require some critical treatment may have died because of the facility that once functioned as St. Jude is limited and cannot be operational at the stadium. Mr. Speaker, healthcare is a serious issue where time is concerned. If we do not have the best facilities to provide timely intervention to arrest complication, people will die unnecessarily. Perhaps it is this kind of St. Lucia the UWP administration envisage when they call themselves workers. Mr. Speaker, I don't understand in the world of honeybee. When the workers worked, they died immediately after. That's the bees, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the world and eyes of the St. Lucia Labour Party, we want to see our people work and live. This resonates with our core values of putting the people of St. Lucia first. Mr. Speaker, as I continue to reflect upon this poorly calculated decision by the last administration, I am mindful of the significance of the St. Jude Hospital in the south of the island. The events of the Christmas Eve trough, Hurricane Thomas, and other natural disasters have shown how vulnerable we are, subject to any one weather event at any given time. The North-South divide will limit our ability to provide adequate health care in the aftermath of such a disaster. Mr. Speaker, we must not wait till we are directly impacted by the situation at St. Jude for us to take a bold stand and ensure that the right actions are taken to get the facility up and ready in the shortest time. Mr. Speaker, we do not know the hour or time that any one of us or our fellow members of the public can be impacted and require medical attention at St. Jude's. Events such as mass shootings, multiple vehicular accidents, plane crashes, and earthquake catastrophes in the South will definitely stretch St. Jude's capacity to respond. Let us stop taking a chance on our lives and fix the mess at St. Jude's. Mr. Speaker, it is my hope and prayer that the government, along with all patriotic St. Lucians, will see the conclusion and transition of patients from the George Odlum Stadium into a functional St. Jude Hospital within the near future. So I stand in support of the government's decision to revert to the 2010 reconstruction plan expeditiously. I would encourage every patriotic St. Lucian to rally behind this effort and let us make St. Jude work for the best of all. According to the member for Soufrière-Fossé-Jacques, it has been a very long journey. Millions of the taxpayers' dollars have been wasted. We have to keep working, Mr. Speaker. This hospital must be completed at the soonest. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Soufrière-Fossé-Jacques. Soufrière Saltibus. That's right, yes, indeed.
You thought you were speaking as chairman of the Boundaries Commission.
There was a time
It was, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would first begin by continuing the same vein that you started with and to wish all colleagues the very best for 2023. I would also, Mr. Speaker, as mentioned by the member for Castries Southeast, express my deepest condolences to the family of Serafina Stephen, originally from Choiseul, Mr. Speaker, and the tragic loss that her family has had to face, leaving a grandmother to take care of 3 young children now that she has passed. I'm hoping that the DNA results will assist in capturing the culprit of that unfortunate situation, the first homicide for the year. Mr. Speaker, to begin, I want to also express to colleagues as well that, to use the words of the reggae artist Egyptian, we are living in serious times, and I think one of the things this year all of us must try to do is to show a lot more love to one another, as the citizens of St. Lucia will follow our lead, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the matter of St. Jude's that we're here to speak about, in fact, the motion before us, Mr. Speaker, is a very, very sensitive issue. We're all aware that the fire that destroyed various components of the aged facility, and it is 13 going on to 14 years, Mr. Speaker, since the patients and staff have had to operate from the George Odlum National Stadium. Mr. Speaker, in recent years, I've had to take my mother, my daughter, to the George Odlum Stadium, and I'm very, very aware and familiar with the conditions under which the doctors and the nurses operate. And so I will definitely continue in the vein of the Prime Minister and those who have spoken before me, to thank, as we have done in the past, thank the staff of the St. Jude's Hospital for their patience, for the amount of sacrifices they have put working under the conditions that they have operated under. As a member of the last administration, I will admit that I was deeply disappointed that we could not have completed the hospital during our reign. Very deeply disappointed, Mr. Speaker, because, you know, in some quarters it is said that that was a contributing factor to our loss. Likewise, it was said in 2011, it was also a contributing factor to the loss of the St. Lucia Labour Party. So I think the issue of St. Jude's is one that all St. Lucians are taking extremely, extremely serious, Mr. Speaker. And we should not continue to play the politics that we have been playing with this very important institution, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the order paper speaks to the report, the motion before us here, as the final report and recommendation for the St. Jude Hospital reconstruction project. And Mr. Speaker, I wish to quote from the motion. Section 2, be it resolved that the Parliament of St. Lucia do advise the Cabinet of Ministers to consider and approve the recommendations presented by the Review Committee for the completion and commissioning of the St. Jude's Hospital to facilitate the move and transfer of operations from the George Odlum National Stadium to this original St. Jude's Hospital site. And 3, that the Parliament of St. Lucia do advise the Cabinet of Ministers to explore other sustainable health opportunities for the St. Jude's Hospital site. Mr. Speaker, I quote these 2 points here, Mr. Speaker, because I find it very passing strange that the Parliament is being asked in this motion to advise the Cabinet of Ministers on the way forward with regards to St. Jude's. And it is sort of an strange, Mr. Speaker, because when I refer to the report that we're discussing here today, point 3, which speaks to the background, it says, and I quote, by Cabinet Conclusion number 6 of 2021, dated August 9th, Cabinet approved the appointment of a committee to review options for the completion and commissioning of St. Jude's Hospital and to advise Cabinet on the feasibility and requirements for an immediate move and transfer of operations from the George Odlum National Stadium to the original St. Jude's site. So, Mr. Speaker, Cabinet has already made a decision, an approval for a committee to approve the immediate move for the transfer of operations from the George Odlum National Stadium. But the confusion here, Mr. Speaker, is that we are now being asked as Parliament to advise Cabinet. So I am a bit confused, Mr. Speaker, as to which one comes first, because Cabinet has already made a decision. But now Cabinet, the motion is coming for us to advise as Parliament to advise Cabinet, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I will speak to the report, which I believe is the crux of the discussion here today. And I can say, Mr. Speaker, that I was a bit disappointed when I got the report because, you know, for a very long time we've been hearing the Prime Minister saying that he cannot wait for the day when we'll be discussing St. Jude's because of, you know, there's so much, you know, that has to be said. And I was kind of disappointed based on, you know, what the Prime Minister said, that we have a report which is basically 35 pages, and the rest is a lot of pictures, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, you know, I thought we would have seen something a little more comprehensive. And I say that, Mr. Speaker, because in reading that report, I find this report to be very contradicting, conflicting, in some instances even confusing, Mr. Speaker, and I will speak about it a little more. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the report is inconclusive and it's incomplete. To go further, Mr. Speaker, I believe this report is making a lot more assumptions than statements of fact. So there's a lot of questions, Mr. Speaker, that I would want the Prime Minister in his rebuttal or other members who have not spoken, at least to clarify, and advise me upon, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I will go through the report. Mr. Speaker, 3.3, the purpose of the committee. The purpose of the committee is to review options, and the footnote, Mr. Speaker, says the options is to examine whether the new building or part thereof can be completed to facilitate the transfer from the George Odlum National Stadium. But this is in direct contradiction to what the Cabinet has requested of the committee, because the Cabinet is very specific in indicating to the committee to advise them on the immediate move and transfer to the original St. Jude site, the old hospital, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, this is the kind of information that this report is providing, and that's why I keep saying that I'm very confused as it relates to what this report is trying to bring for our attention. So, Mr. Speaker, 3.5 of the report. The mandate of the review committee is to prepare and submit a report on the findings and recommendations, a roadmap for the completion, transfer, and operationalization of the health facility within 4 weeks of the appointment of the committee. The committee was officially commissioned on 9 September 2021, on the 12th anniversary of the tragic fire hazard. The report, Mr. Speaker, is dated 28th October 2021, Mr. Speaker, and note we are in January 2023. Mr. Speaker, let's go forward a bit there, Mr. Speaker. Okay. Mr. Speaker, we heard a lot, and I actually I have been provided with some additional information today, Mr. Speaker, with regards to some additional reports that were provided, Mr. Speaker. But I note, Mr. Speaker, 5.5 speaks to between 2007 and 2008, when the government of St. Lucia commissioned, and the former Prime Minister, Minister for Infrastructure spoke to it, when the government of St. Lucia commissioned the National Vision Plan, NVP, the objective was to formulate a framework for development and a shared vision for the entire island. The NVP was expected to provide the tools for national development with a plan of action. In addition, the recommendations contained in the Southern Quadrant Plan were aimed at creating St. Jude's Hospital into a regional hospital complex and to develop and improve general health care and support services for the medical training schools expected to be attracted to the south of the island. With that kind of vision, Mr. Speaker, you would think that in the whole reconstruction of St. Jude's, that thought process in terms of ensuring that what we're building is something for the future, Mr. Speaker. This business of, Mr. Speaker, when we come into government, we continue to act in sort of 5-year capsules. We have to stop that thinking, Mr. Speaker, and start to think long-term in terms of, the long-term vision for our country, Mr. Speaker. We have to stop thinking about, whether what we do will ensure, our victory at the next polls, Mr. Speaker, but to think for the betterment of the country, Mr. Speaker. And I think this was the thinking in the last administration when it was brought to our attention that to continue the old St. Jude's would cost us about $100 million. I have a letter here from Tracy Polius. A letter from Tracy Polius, the former permanent secretary where she actually indicated in that letter, and Mr. Speaker, I speak, the total project costs, and she was speaking to the old St. Jude's, is estimated at EC $178.7 million, with a supervision to cost ratio of 8.7%, Mr. Speaker. And being aware that already $98 million had already been expended. So that comes to about $80-something million. And remember, that's an estimate. Remember, that's an estimate, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, with that information, Mr. Speaker, and you know, Mr. Speaker, I want to just pause there for a little while, because the member for Soufrière Francis Jacques and the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, in their profession, Mr. Speaker, they know what it is to, to do things the right way. And in terms of ensuring that their profession is worth what it is, Mr. Speaker, they would be very careful going forward in anything that they're not sure of. And we had, Mr. Speaker, St. Jude's Hospital, when we came in 2016, 7 years. 7 years a hospital is being constructed, Mr. Speaker. There's no fixed contract amount. There's no approved drawings from the DCA, Mr. Speaker. No, if an approved drawing from DCA can be provided, I will swallow my words right away, Mr. Speaker. Right away. According to that, the member for Catri Central has asked me to show him the one for the box. According to the report in the appendix, the members of the review committee indicated that they saw approved drawings for that box. It's right there. 10. But anyway, Mr. Speaker, I'll move on, Mr. Speaker. I'll move on. So, Mr. Speaker,
Member for Suzel, address the resolution. If any other member wishes to address you, they stand on a point of order.
Thank you,
There's no
Mr.
need for you
Speaker.
to respond to anybody.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know, there's going to be quite a bit of distraction, particularly from my friend here. But, Mr. Speaker, and I was indicating, Mr. Speaker, if you come into office, as I said, Mr. Speaker, where you're aware that a project is supposed to cost a certain value, to date that value has pretty much been doubled, Mr. Speaker. Wouldn't you ask, hey, let us pause? And I know you would do it. Let us pause. Let us see what is going on. Let us not just continue pushing money down a hole. Let us see where we're going. And this is exactly what the Honorable Prime Minister did when he came in 2016, Mr. Speaker. He paused. I agree, maybe 3 years was a long time. I agree with that. But let's juxtapose it. Let's juxtapose it to the highway being built in Grosile. A contract that was awarded in October 2020. Okay? And elections was 2021. Not even a year. And it was stopped. So isn't that double standards? Isn't that double standard, Mr. Speaker? So, Mr. Speaker, we had to be clear and let's stop. We want the best for St. Lucia. We want the best for St. Lucia. Okay? So, Mr. Speaker, I move on. But I believe, Mr. Speaker, if we want to follow the National Vision Plan as it relates to ensuring that our hospital in the South can cater for future, Mr. Speaker, we have to make sure we build something that's because we have reports showing so many weaknesses in the old St. Jude's, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I have, I did not have full sight of the audit report, but I do have a number of weaknesses and concerns that were raised. And it appears to me that the old St. Jude's seem to have been a fire hazard in its current construct. Mr. Speaker, in the audit report that you've quoted, and a number of other people have quoted. So it's a concern, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, when we think of the expansion of the South, when we speak of the expansion of Uranore Airport, when we speak of some of the things that we wanted to do in terms of the the cruise port, Mr. Speaker, when we think of the increase in call centers, when we think of the hotel in Choiseul that's coming up, when we think of, Mr. Speaker, a number of developments that were coming in the South, we have to think of how we can set ourselves up to be ready. In addition, Mr. Speaker, to what we consider to be medical tourism, a big thing now. Big thing, Mr. Speaker. And we could be the lead on that, Mr. Speaker. You know, they continue to talk about the box, Mr. Speaker. What we are building there, Mr. Speaker, is the exact duplicate of what was built in Cayman Islands, Mr. Speaker. The exact duplicate. Providing, Mr. Speaker, international assistance, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the report, Mr. Speaker, also speaks to, and you know, I want to make sure that we're aware of it, Mr. Speaker. It speaks to the facility, the old St. Jude's, and the member for Castries South spoke to it. The member for Castries North spoke to it. The report spoke to it. The PM has spoken to it before. That this old St. Jude's was an aging facility. That's a fact. It was an old building, Mr. Speaker, and there were a number of things, Mr. Speaker, you know, that were not, you know, in the reality of a futuristic hospital, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the report, Mr. Speaker, in 6.4 also speaks to significant factors which impacted the St. Jude's reconstruction phase 1, or the old hospital, Mr. Speaker. And the report quotes three areas, three incidents rather. One, the impact of Hurricane Thomas in 2010, the Christmas Eve trough in 2013, and general elections of 2016. These three incidents, the report quoted as having an impact on St. Jude's Hospital not being completed. But the current government, when in opposition, and even when they came into government, completely dismissed the reality of COVID that we had to deal with for 2 years to complete phase 2, Mr. Speaker. Isn't that being hypocritical? Isn't that being unfair, Mr. Speaker, when you want to compare? There was also at that time several supply chain issues which delayed the project, Mr. Speaker. So let's play a balanced hand when we're talking about factors that affect the completion of St. Jude's. Very important, Mr. Speaker, because a number of members have also quoted it, and I want to read it out because it's in the report. It's in the report as well, Mr. Speaker. 6.7. As St. Jude's Hospital Reconstruction Project, Technical Audit Interim Report, January 2017. It says, and I quote, "Perhaps above all else that the audit report has recorded, the following assertions represents the most significant recommendation which has not only failed to avert the abandonment of St. Jude's Hospital Phase 1, which is the old building, but to inform fundamental design and planning criteria for St. Jude's Hospital Phase 2, the new building. Consistently, the design and planning of the building that make up this facility have been observed to omit adequate spaces for the running, but more importantly, accessing of services within the building." That's your report, you know, okay? In hospitals, that's the audit. In hospital, in hospitals, it is important that building services equipment be accessible for maintenance without compromising the sanitary and functional roles of each unit as much as possible. The issues highlighted are significant nature. However, we do see a great value present in the works complete to date and believe that the project is salvageable and could be converted into a facility that can properly serve the needs of St. Lucia. That doesn't say about can convert it to a hospital. It doesn't say convert it to a hospital. No, because there are more deficiencies as a hospital. There were more. No, the plan was for a medical school. Medical school. That's the plan. Right next to it. That was the plan, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I continue. The visual component of the design does little for the potential that the history and nostalgia of the site dictates. More could be done to uplift the image and swell the hearts of all those that have contributed to a facility held in such high esteem by the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, I also wish, Mr. Speaker, to quote 7.3 design criteria. According to the St. Jude's Hospital Reconstruction Product Status Report dated 29th July 2021,
The good thing is nobody you know. and look at the two people.
Mr. Speaker, I look to you. I look to you, Mr.
Members, please allow the member for Suzel Saltibus to pursue his contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to the St. Jude's Hospital Reconstruction Product Status dated 29 July 2021 by the NAO, prior to the commencement of the site preparation of the work of St. Jude's Hospital Phase 2, Government of St. Lucia took the decision to construct a 90-bed healthcare facility within 103,140 square feet to cater for both inpatient and outpatient services. Phase 2 was expected to include, but not limited to, feature the construction of a new wing to incorporate all the functions and services of the existing eastern surgical wings, integration through retrofitting of some existing buildings to achieve a fully functional hospital to match the service of a level 4 facility, and revision of the internal layout of buildings to be integrated for functional efficiency and compliance to minimum standards. So this actually says, Mr. Speaker, that the intention was, apart from the new building, the intention was to use some of the other buildings that were there. So it was not a matter of abandoning the project in its entirety, because we were thinking of where we were going to bring this hospital for the future of our people, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, the same report goes on to say, it must be noted that in discussions with the Ministry of Health, they indicated that the hospital is a level 5 facility and not a level 4. And this error was perpetuated despite clarification. No, the recommendation, Mr. Speaker, you told me not to take on sidebars, but I will take on every now and then. The ministry, Mr. Speaker, was recommending that St. Jude should be a 70-room bed facility. But what we were doing in the box was make it a 90-bed facility, Mr. Speaker. That's what it was. So we were actually improving on the bed capacity of St. Jude, Mr. I have it here, Mr. Speaker. 7.8, Ministry of Health user involvement. The ministry also advised that based on their analysis, St. Jude should be a 70-bed level 5 facility. The same report, 7.8, Ministry of Health user involvement. The last line, Mr. Speaker. I want you to ask St. Jude's board, St. Jude's staff, whether they believe St. Jude should be a 70 or 90-bed facility, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I continue, Mr. Speaker, in 8. Because you see, this debate should really be about the report that is before us, Mr. Speaker. Factors to consider for the transition plan, current conditions, and I go down, Mr. Speaker. The decision to abandon the phase 1 has created duplication of spaces. There are thus 2 possible approaches in moving out of the completion of St. Jude's in the shortest possible time. The pursuit of establishing the hospital on the ground floor of the newly built structure, as was being planned, or alternatively, to use the best spaces created on the present facility. 8.2. Establishing the hospital at the lower level of the new West Wing, Phase 2, which is the new hospital. The Department of Economic Development has been presented with an estimate of $48 million for the completion of the ground floor. And the Prime Minister this morning spoke to a $70 million Yeah, I will. In discussions with the consultant, they advised that the MEP services for the upper floor will have to be inserted in the ceiling during the development of the ground floor. It thus means that the configuration of the upper floor is fixed once these works are completed. It was not clear if the external works such as the car parks were included in that sum. There was a consensus among the review committee that these works will take less than 18 months for completion. Now, Mr. Speaker, will take not less than 18 months for completion. We had said, Mr. Speaker, that it would cost 48 million to complete the ground floor so that the members from the George staff and patients from George Odlum could move in, Mr. Speaker, and it will also take 6 months, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, sorry? No, I'm speaking to the report, your review committee. Anyway, I'm going forward, Mr. Speaker, and I interrupted my good friend from Soufriere, and she told me I should sit down and wait for my turn. The following issues need to be considered in the selection of the ground floor for establishing the hospital. There is need for confirmation that the external cladding, which may contain a combustible material, does not meet the NFPA 285 specifications, and I beg your pardon? Yeah, sorry. Which may contain a combustible material does meet the NFPA 285 specification, and that the external cladding was signed off by a locally registered structural engineer as required under the contract. The contractor needs to provide the confirmation before the building can be considered safe for occupation. And it goes further that the government of St. Lucia should also not pay for these panels until they are deemed fit for purpose. And Mr. Speaker, I quote that because that's in direct contradiction to what the report says in 10.2D. And let's go to 10.2D, Mr. Speaker. 10.2D, the review committee indicates to instruct the main contractor on the St. Jude's Hospital Reconstruction Project Phase 2 via the NAO within the Department of Economic Development to complete the installation of the external cladding, seal of the roof parapet wall detail, and close of the new dialysis. So if it's not good, why are you asking to complete it?
Mr. Speaker.
If you're not checked on
Member
it.
for Suzel, what is the point of order? Member for
Mr.
Castries
Speaker.
South.
On a point of order. The member is misleading the House. This is a clear, obvious use of English.
Just have a seat there. No, I was asking him.
Yeah. This is clear, obvious use of English. If I say to you, you need to confirm that this material does not have that, only then you can use it. And then I say the next action is to complete the cladding. It means before you complete the cladding, you need to confirm that it does not have the material, and that's very obvious. That's precedent to completing it is to confirm it doesn't have that. That's simple English. If I tell you, I need you to jump off the building, but before you jump off the building, make sure there is something you take. There is sponge there. It doesn't mean you just jump off the building. So you need to confirm it does not have that. Then having confirmed that, because that's the first action, you then complete the cladding.
Yeah. But these are your words, huh?
But member,
These are your words. The report does not
member
say
for
that.
Suzel, but member for Castries South, you will admit that the words are subject to different interpretations.
That's my
Because the language is not as tight as you were suggesting. Well, it might seem obvious to one person that one should follow the other. To another person, it may not seem so obvious. So the member for Suzel, but the member for Suzel does have the right to
So,
Member for Suzel, proceed, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the cladding is what you call ACP cladding, and it's a pity that the member for Castries South is not there. because I'm sure he can provide us with what is ACP cladding.
But member for Swazelle, you're just defending a point of order that the report didn't say what the member for Castries South says, but now you are inserting something that the same report does not say, and you're calling on the member for Castries South East to assist you?
Because it appears
But
to me, Mr.
no,
Speaker,
but clearly you are doing a double standard there.
I understand.
If you are not going to accept the Castries South MP's interpretation of what 8.1 says vis-à-vis 10.2, you surely cannot insert what you're about to say there.
Mr. Speaker, I will continue, and I am bringing to the attention of the House that the cladding is ACP cladding. Okay. I am bringing to the attention of the House, and any one of us can Google ACP cladding and know ACP cladding recognition as fireproof in terms of its acceptance, Mr. Speaker. He also goes on to say, Mr. Speaker, to instruct the main contractor of the St. Jude's Hospital Phase 2 via the NO within the Department of Economic Planning to complete the installation of the external cladding, seal of the roof parapet, wall detail, and close of the new west wing seated on the lower platform of the St. Jude's Hospital Phase 2. The other active contracts related to Phase 2 should be terminated or variation issued to amend the scope, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move on. The report, Mr. Speaker, you see, and Mr. Speaker, that's the thing, sometimes you question, the clarity which this report and the message that this report is trying to send out. The same 8.2D, Mr. Speaker, St. Jude's management may also want to be informed of the energy consumption of the new building, given that the air conditioning of the entire structure will run 24 hours per day. Mr. Speaker, that's a hospital. OKEU AC runs 24 hours a day. So I'm trying to wonder what is the reason for inserting that there, Mr. Speaker. 8.3, using the best space approach. It is estimated that 30% of the Phase 1 was intended to be used with the new buildings. As I said, some of the additional buildings. It therefore means that whatever approach is considered, these spaces will be utilized. It is therefore comes down to whether it is a more cost-effective to complete the remaining 70% of Phase 1, the old building, to complete the remaining 70% of Phase 1, Mr. Speaker, the old building, or to finish the ground floor of the new building. The cost comparison is only required if the panels have been confirmed as fit for purpose and work can continue on the building.
Member for Swazelle, you do now admit that this line does support what the member for Castries South said earlier. The line that you've just read.
8.4, Mr. Speaker. To date, the MEP designs for the new building remain incomplete and unavailable. It means the critical data to inform the construction and project cost remains incomplete and unavailable, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't understand that particular line where it says the designs remain incomplete and unavailable, because according to the appendix, Mr. Speaker, section referred to Appendix 10, it does speak to designs and approvals being available and were available for their review, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, service routes, 8.7. The review committee has understood that a substantial part of the building services within the Phase 2 are to be located within the plenum ceiling void of the lower level of the west wing, and as such the building works, including the partitioning, cannot progress because the designs of the services remain incomplete. This therefore means that a transition plan is not feasible as currently envisage. What I don't understand, Mr. Speaker, is if that is correct, Mr. Speaker, why would DC have provided approval for phase 2? So I need some clarification on that, Mr. Speaker. Okay. Okay, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy that my colleague from Castries Southeast has entered, because he spoke on 4 occasions about the exorbitant cost per square foot. I think he quoted 3,000 per square foot. Am I correct? Right. And Mr. Speaker, based on 8.12, project cost comparison, 8.12, project cost comparison, second paragraph, it speaks to both phase 1, the old building, and phase 2. It says, in that regard, with a gross floor area of 165,000 square feet, it can be assumed that the St. Jude's Hospital Reconstruction Project phase 1, the old building, was executed at a unit rate of $358 square foot at the stage the work was ceased. The St. Jude's Hospital Reconstruction Project phase 2, on the other hand, with a gross floor area of 154,000 square feet, is currently at EC 118.05 million, according to the contract, or EC 766 square feet. So, Mr. Speaker, there seems to be a contradiction in terms of the report, in terms of what was provided, and what the member is.
And even the report is
I beg your pardon? Phase 2 is the box, but the member from Castries Southeast indicated it costs 3,000.
I'm glad you adopted the name, the box.
Yeah.
Phase 2.
Just point of correction, Mr.
No,
Speaker.
for clarification, your
Point of correction.
Remember, you can only have that point of correction
No,
Point
if
of
the member
objection.
is,
Point of objection, sorry.
but yes, only if the member is willing to yield. Are you prepared to yield, member?
Yes. I said with the trajectory,
Sorry, you said what?
with the trajectory, to finish it, the final cost per square foot, because currently it's about 118, it would take it's about 170 million, it would cost another $100 million towards completion. It would take it to about 300 and something. So you're correct in what you're saying, but that's not what I said. My figure of 3,000 is towards the completion. It would be the most expensive hospital in the region.
Oh, I forgot. You're the one who built the bathroom for 150,000. I forgot.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, conveniently, Mr. Speaker, this section of the report, 8.12, Mr. Speaker, conveniently refers to the gross floor area of phase 2, as has been referred to by the members opposite the box, as 154,000 square feet, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, that figure is actually incorrect based on what we have on the floor, because phase 2 includes the dialysis and the physiotherapy building, Mr. Speaker. And the dialysis building is 24,426 square feet, and the physiotherapy building is 17,088 square feet, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, when you add all of the square footage, it actually works out to a lot less than what is being quoted here as $543 a square foot. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if that was an omission, if that was deliberate, Mr. Speaker, but I thought it necessary to point it out, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we go to 8.13, Commissioning Program. From the discussions of the review committee, the review committee has convened with key stakeholders and the review of project documents. It is evident that the financing that was secured and accessible up to August 2016, the level of construction of St. Jude's Hospital Phase 1, the procurement schedule, and the planned delivery of outstanding materials and availability on island of FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and services already paid for in full, the scheduled commission of the facility by September 2017. So that's August 2016 to September 2017. You know, I highlight that, and it's a pity my neighbor from Library is not here because, you know, he continuously indicated that all we needed was some paint and chemical, Mr. Speaker. But very instructive here what was being indicated in terms of the commissioning of the program. Mr. Speaker, I just want, considering the urgency with regards to which the Prime Minister spoke to getting out of the George Odlum National Stadium, and I think there was actually 2 members of the review committee that was asked to actually look at the urgent needs for the George Odlum National Stadium in terms of what would make life a lot more comfortable. And there, A to F, Mr. Speaker, points were raised. The sealant between the concrete section of the upper stands need replacement to avoid the inflows of water into the rooms below during heavy rains. The external canopies at present pose a risk due to significant corrosion of the steel members of the space frame. The Olympic rings attached to the upper level are severely corroded and pose a risk for collapse and injury to pedestrians below. They ought to be removed with urgency. An automatic transfer switch for 1 generator required to improve service. A review of the sewer treatment plant is necessary, and soft furniture is required in various locations to be determined by St. Jude's. I raise that to ask the question if these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 urgent needs have been addressed, considering the report dated 28th October 2021 and the urgency with which we all speak to try to make the staff more comfortable, Mr. Speaker. So hopefully the Prime Minister will enlighten me, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move to 9.2, long-term upgrades for healthcare provision, and I speak to point E. It says the installation of the oxygen generator plant and associated vacuum medical air system now housed in a factory shell in the Viewfort Free Zone, away from the George Odlum National Stadium, should have been installed at the St. Jude's Hospital Reconstruction Project site and used to feed intensive care unit operating theaters, recovery room, and adjoining medical wards. The installation of the at the offsite location is, however, well advanced, with a donation of $76,000 by Lucia for the electricity supply infrastructure and support from Invest and Lucia. Yet still, Mr. Speaker, in 9.3, where he speaks specifically to oxygen generating plant, it says the review committee has not ascertained whether the oxygen generating plant, which was purchased under the St. Jude's Hospital Reconstruction Project Phase 1, was ever shipped and delivered to the island. So in one hand, you're saying you know where it is well in advance, you have got the money from Lucilec and Invest, but in the next point, you're saying you don't know if it was shipped to the island, Mr. Speaker. Contradictory, conflicting, Mr. Speaker. So that is confusing to me, Mr. Speaker. The plant, in fact, Mr. Speaker, the installation of that plant was actually paid under this government's term, well, not by the government, but by St. Jude's, Mr. Speaker. So some clarification on that would be required, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, under the recommendation, again, A says the proposed plan to complete the ground floor of the new building should not be pursued. But I'm not even that's an oxymoron, because the objective was to speak to moving into phase 1, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, 10.3.1, assumptions, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I spoke earlier on Mr. Speaker, that this report was a report made up mainly of assumptions, Mr. Speaker, and you come into Parliament to ask Parliament to make a decision on assumptions. As far as I'm concerned, Parliament should be making decisions based on fact, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, this is, regardless of the approach adopted, and these are assumptions, Mr. Speaker, a transition plan must therefore be based on, but not limited to, any of all or all of the following assumptions. The government of St. Lucia shall be privy to and can terminate or vary all current ongoing contracts. All construction documentation, including project drawings, are readily available for the review and for reference by others. The St. Jude's Hospital Reconstruction Project Phase 1 can attain full approval from the Development Control Authority. I'm not sure. Has any approval been received? When I made a statement earlier, some people were, were murmuring about it, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, based on some of the concerns, Mr. Speaker, that the audit report highlighted, Mr. Speaker, we need to be very careful, Mr. Speaker, that for purposes of expediency, that approval is not given. We play with people's lives, Mr. Speaker, particularly concerning the number of fire hazard potential that has been quoted in that audit report, Mr. Speaker. The transfer of the entire operations of St. Jude's Hospital at GONS can commence within 18 months. Okay? So, Mr. Speaker, we've been told that it might take about 18 months, although the Prime Minister said he's not going to give a date. But, that's a concerning to me, Mr. Speaker, in terms of how but Mr. Speaker, in all of that, we've been spoken. The same thing that happened many years ago, Mr. Speaker, seems to be happening again, because we don't have a budget, we don't have an estimate as to the cost of completing phase 1, the same phase 1. So it's concerning to me, Mr. Speaker, that are we duplicating what happened many years ago, Mr. Speaker? So it's a concern to me, Mr. Speaker. F, Mr. Speaker. Installation of internal building services, including power, lighting, air conditioning, CCTV, surveillance, fire signage are approximately 50% completed, Mr. Speaker. Is that a fact? Is all of the services up to par to what is accepted in a hospital, Mr. Speaker? Internal partitions, and I want the member to I want you to listen, because obviously you're the expert in your field, obviously, and internal partitions within key buildings, and that's an assumption, are lightweight and freestanding. Does that speak to drywall? I'm asking, because from what I have seen in the old St. Jude's when I visited it, a lot of the partitions are hard concrete, right? So is that in opposition to what a hospital should operate under, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, 10.3.3, I'm highlighting some of the concerns that I have in reading this report, Mr. Speaker, quite a few. 10.3.3, transition plan, 18 months. Point C, appoint a project design and management consulting team. That one confuses me, Mr. Speaker, because, and I'll tell you why, Mr. Speaker, because if I remember, a lot there's a program on television, quite a bit, which speaks to a group called Halcro that was paid $6 million for project designs, Mr. Speaker. So I'm not sure, are we going to do that all over again, Mr. Speaker? F, recycle as much of the existing SHG, St. Jude's Hospital project phase 1 works internal as possible to avoid demolition and reconstruction of the facility. And that concerns me, Mr. Speaker, because you're asking to recycle as much of an aging plant, Mr. Speaker. Now, I mean, the politics will go one route, Mr. Speaker, but we have to be concerned, because somewhere down the road, Mr. Speaker, as members of Parliament, anything happens, we're the ones that are going to take the blame. We're the ones that are going to take the blame. So, Mr. Speaker, let's some time ago I told the Honorable Prime Minister that he has had many opportunities to unite St. Lucians, and I believe that was one of them, Mr. Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, through you, Mr. Speaker. This is one of them, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Prime Minister would come out as a real hero, Mr. Speaker, had he adopted phase 2, Mr. Speaker. A real hero. You'd be the man of the year. Rick Wayne would give you man of the year. If you had gone to phase 2, the new building. $48 million. Mr. Speaker, so Mr. Speaker, so just a concern because according to the report, Mr. Speaker, under suggested program, it spoke to the program starting from January 2022 to June 2022, formulate a completion plan, July 22 to December 22, implement a completion plan, January. So, Mr. Speaker, it appears that we're way behind schedule already. And obviously, it's a concern. And Mr. Speaker, I want the best. So I really do not want another election cycle on behalf of St. Jude's. I really don't want that. I'm speaking from my heart, Mr. Speaker. I don't want that. Okay? And that's why I want us to avoid it. Let me tell you, both sides have made, colossal errors with regards to St. Jude's, and let the chips fall where they have to fall. I don't really care about that, Mr. Speaker. Let the chips fall. But at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, as a member who represents a community in the south of the island, we want St. Jude's complete. We want the best for the people in the south of the island, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I just, just some other matters in concluding, Mr. Speaker, I want to raise based on, I wanted to speak strictly to the report because I felt that what...
You have 7 minutes left.
7 minutes, I'll have time, Mr. Speaker, because I felt that's what I came here for, Mr. Speaker. But based on matters that have been raised, Mr. Speaker, I just thought I should, comment on them, Mr. Speaker. We have heard from the Honorable Prime Minister, I heard the member for Castries North speak to it, Mr. Speaker, that the foundation of phase 2 moved from 3 million to 9 million. Well, it was said by a number of people. Not today you said it, You said from 3 million to 9 million. Now, Mr. Speaker, that 3 million figure, honestly, I have not seen it anywhere, so I wish somebody could tell me where it came from. But I actually have, Mr. Speaker, a copy of the estimates, Mr. Speaker, for phase 1, activity schedule, general items, 374,500. Demolition and site clearance, 120,000. Earthworks, 4.4 million. I'm skipping the other figure. Drainage, 40,000. Parking lots, 1.3 million. Subtotal, 6.3 million. Contingencies, 629,000. VAT, 865,000. A total of $7,784,126.96, Mr. Speaker. Well, I have not seen. This is what the one that said 3 million? Okay, so this is what, so I would like if you could provide that for my edification, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also, and we have to be very careful, Mr. Speaker, because you see, the St. Lucian public is seeing one thing, they're hearing one thing, the action is being taken at another end, Mr. Speaker, and they're wondering what the hell is going on, and that's, I tell you, Mr. Speaker, why we should not play politics with St. Jude's. I have, the member for Castries South told me at lunch that he has quite a few clips of news items, Mr. So we must always be very careful what we say because people are recording us, Mr. Speaker. But an HTS news item, March 11, 2017, one of the members of the review committee who is recommending that we use the old building, phase 1, he says, and just like the Prime Minister, I'll not mention the name this time, what has happened at St. Jude's is a disgrace. 2017 is the worst that I've seen in my 34 years of engineering in terms of contract administration. It is a mess of Herculean, as it says, proportions. It was sad as a professional engineer reading such a document and to see how state funds have been so wasted. It was really difficult to read the document and to see the level of maladministration, as it were, in terms of how we should run a project and run a contract. So that was a bit sad, one must say, and it really goes to the issue of accountability. There's quite a bit more, Mr. Speaker, but that's important because this same individual is on a committee after he has said that in 2017, and in 2020, one is saying all of that is okay. We go to phase one, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, I'm concerned, as to whether we are going into a substandard facility. I am concerned about the amount of money it will cost us, Mr. Speaker. I am concerned as to how much longer the patients and staff will suffer at the George Odlum National Stadium, Mr. Speaker. And at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, I want the best for St. Jude's. I want the best for the South, Mr. Speaker. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, it is a wrong move to return to the old site. I believe we should make the best of what is considered to be a futuristic structure and move into that building, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rest my case.
I P2. Let me go now. You go after me. You go after me. After, before you forget. Come on. You can see. Before I forget something, let me go before you.
Member for Ancillary Canaries.
You're really bigger boys.
That's right. Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by wishing my constituency a Happy New Year. I would also like to wish you and the members of the staff of Parliament a Happy New Year, and continue to seek their indulgence when they facilitate me on odd hours. Mr. Speaker, any debate on the St. Jude's Hospital reconstruction project must involve the removal of myths and untruths that have plagued this project. Mr. Speaker, I would like to direct your attention to Appendix G on page 43, which is the site plan of the final handover report, review report on the 20th of October 2021. Page 43, Mr. Speaker, Appendix G.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, you will see the buildings in yellow are the new buildings that were constructed by the last administration. And the buildings shaded in blue are the buildings which were constructed in phase one during the administration of the St. Lucia Labour Party. Mr. Speaker, have a very good look at the diagram. I'm not qualified to use one finger, so I'll use both hands. Have a look at the diagram, Mr. Speaker. Yeah. Building number 7 and building number 8 are the physiotherapy and dialysis buildings, respectively. Both buildings, Mr. Speaker, were demolished and rebuilt by the former government. Oh. Building number 14, which is the new wing of phase 2, was constructed to replace building number 2, the east wing, and building number 3, the surgical wing. What is readily observed, Mr. Speaker, is that all the buildings in phase 1, except for the east wing and the surgical wing, were required to create a functional hospital. Right. So even if what the member for Social says is even remotely true, you would not be able to run a functional hospital just with the box. That would not have been possible. It would not have been a functional hospital. The first myth and untruth that has to be dismissed, Mr. Speaker, is that all the buildings constructed in phase 1 would not be used in creating the so-called state-of-the-art hospital. You would not be able to run the hospital with just the box, Bradley. The new rectangular building that is being touted as the state-of-the-art hospital could not have functioned without the buildings in phase 1. So, Mr. Speaker, the people of St. Lucia have been lied to throughout the term of the last administration. Mr. Speaker, If 12 buildings in phase 1 were required for the proper functioning of the so-called state-of-the-art hospital, then the question that must be asked is why did the last administration refuse to use the materials that were already on site to finish those buildings? Why allow the materials to be moved into hardware stores and certain people's backyards? Why spend $1 million on a technical audit? When it is completed, you suddenly realize that the audit is saying, I know it's been read before, Mr. Speaker, but I want to also say it myself. It sounds page 13. I'm aware where it is. I'm aware where it is. The audit is saying that there is great value present in the works. And as the member for Social is encouraging me to read the entire sentence, I will do so. However, we do see a great value present in the works completed to date and believe the project is salvageable and could be converted into a facility that can properly serve the needs of St. Lucia. The then Minister of Economic Planning is so ashamed that he refused to make the report a document of the House. But Mr. Speaker, as I just read from page 13, you'll realize that there was great value in continuing what was started before. So there are many questions to answer, Mr. Speaker. Where are the materials that were bought and stored at the end of phase 1? How many of those materials went into the renovation of some people's houses? Mr. Speaker, I fully support the decision of this government to accept the recommendations of the review committee, but there must be an investigation into what happened at St. Jude Hospital during the last administration. Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia cannot afford this level of recklessness. This is a snapshot of where we were at the point of the audit. And it is incredulous, Mr. Speaker, that any government could have stopped this project. Mr. Speaker, we are a responsible government, so I will not mention the names. But however, it appears to be, Mr. Speaker, another one of those vaccine scenarios. Mr. Speaker, a company was paid $2,051,347.42 for the supply and installation of radiological equipment. To date, Mr. Speaker, no delivery has been made. Another company was advanced $4,970,874.66 for the medical equipment. No equipment has been delivered to date. Another company, very interestingly, Mr. Speaker, was contracted to supply, assemble, and install furniture, equipment, medical gas lines, and a nurse call system. The contract value, Mr. Speaker, was $7,567,612.57, with the amount being paid at the time of the audit of $6,934,663.35, suggesting, Mr. Speaker, that a significant amount of furniture and equipment would have arrived in St. Lucia at the point of audit. The contract sum, Mr. Speaker, was $7 million, but to date, $6.9 million has already been paid out. But where is all of that equipment? Another company, Mr. Speaker, was paid $3,780,000 for the supply of doors. To date, no doors have been installed. Another firm, Mr. Speaker, was paid $811,722.47 for the supply of paint. Only a small quantity for priming has been supplied. However, the report does state that the firm indicated that they are still in possession of some of that paint. Mr. Speaker, the member for Social spoke about drywall and ceilings, etc., etc. A payment was made for the supply and installation, but very little exists on site. So it would appear that these materials must have been stored somewhere off-site. Another company, Mr. Speaker, was paid $87,705 for steel railing supply. To date, none of that is obvious on site. But what we do know, Mr. Speaker, at the end of 2016, before they came into office, what has been verified to be on site were 5 40-foot containers with building materials. 1 40-foot container containing plumbing items ranging from faucets, toilets, PVC pipes. A storage container containing air conditioning equipment, electrical fittings. A 20-foot container containing ICT equipment and cables. A storage room with pumps, tanks, and fittings. Another storage room with flooring materials. 5 40-foot containers with medical equipment and furniture, ranging from beds, chairs, tables, sinks, and cabinets. So if all of that was present before you got into government, why not simply complete the work? But then we have before us here, Mr. Speaker, a series of locations where materials apparently are being stored, including as far as Italy. In some instances, Mr. Speaker, there are even materials being stored in Spain. Now, why would the government pay for materials, make arrangements for a warehouse, but yet still, they are still somewhere between Spain, Italy, certain metals of the Caribbean, and other locations? One need not wonder why the last administration, Mr. Speaker, never wanted the report to be tabled in Parliament, as the very report which they quote from to defend their decision to abandon the buildings contradicts that decision. What is also quite instructive, Mr. Speaker, and the Member of Parliament for Miku South is on record as confirming they stopped the project because they realized it was not close to being completed. Mr. Speaker, not that they were concerned about some qualified reason, structural deficiency, health and safety concern, but on a whim, just like that, he decided that we were going to stop the project. The tens and thousands of people who rely on the hospital in the South did not matter, Mr. Speaker. We are left to wonder whether the intent was to spend 100 million or to build a hospital. Mr. Speaker, the evidence suggests that the St. Jude's was a vehicle for a spending spree. The level of secrecy of the project undertaken by the last administration was so pronounced that the Ministry of Health officials were not involved in the project. Mr. Speaker, how can you proceed to construct a hospital with no engagement with the Ministry of Health and other relevant stakeholders? Certainly, the former Minister for Economic Planning possessed certain skills, but I do not think his expertise extended to hospital construction. This government, Mr. Speaker, will ensure that there is full engagement with all stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, the suggestions being presented by the Member of Parliament for Sozel to the public that the new wing was close to completion when they left office is completely false. Mr. Speaker, in the above context, the Cabinet was presented with 2 possible approaches in the completion of the St. Jude's Hospital in the shortest possible time, which should be the priority of any government, unlike the delay to scheme posture of the last administration. Mr. Speaker, it was a delay to scheme posture by the last administration. The 2 options, the pursuit of establishing the hospital on the ground floor of the newly built structure, as was being planned by the previous administration, and accept the previous built structures should be abandoned, or alternatively, use the best spaces created on the present facility. The Cabinet decided that the optimal approach would be to use the best spaces created over 10 years of construction activity to facilitate an early transfer from the St. Jude or from the George Odlum Stadium. Mr. Speaker, the buildings that were being demolished by the last administration had nothing to do with structural integrity. The buildings were demolished to create space for the newly built structures. The dialysis building and the physiotherapy building, which were demolished and rebuilt, will be incorporated into the transition phase 1. Mr. Speaker, we have no intention of demolishing any structure or abandoning any structure at the St. Jude's Hospital for political purposes. the taxpayers of this country will not be abused by this government. Every structure on St. Jude's lands will be completed, and the South will have an excellent medical complex. This administration, Mr. Speaker, builds, we do not demolish. We incorporate, we do not abandon. And to dismay of my colleague from Castries South, Mr. Speaker, in closing, I would like to express my profound gratitude to the patients, staff, nurses and doctors for their contribution, dedication, patience, and commitment over the years. We hear you, we see you, and we thank you. We will work flat out to deliver the caring and conducive working environment that you as citizens of this country, not products of elsewhere, deserve. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
The member for Grosley.
Mr. Speaker, permit me leave to congratulate Zeta James, the West Indies team, and the 19 team for half century and stellar performance on the international and the 19 level. Mr. Speaker, also permit me leave to congratulate you, Edward, on dominating the Windward Islands on the 15 Cricket Championship, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've been instructed to say that he is from Castries Southeast. Mr. Speaker, also permit me leave to send condolences to the family and friends of Mr. Ricky Desmond Eswick, a former national basketballer and servant of the people of Central Castries in sports development. Mr. Speaker, he loved and served this country honorably. And of course, Mr. Speaker, you would have heard the banter. He was part of a national basketball team that featured the member for Miku South. Get back to that. Mr. Speaker, I never thought that I would see the day. Not yet. Mr. Speaker, I never thought that I would see the day when the member for Choiseul Saltibus would come to this honorable house and debate on the number of pages in a report. Mr. Speaker, I was astounded. Mr. Speaker, this is while he sat in cabinet with a report that was commissioned, $1 million spent, and he did not even know the contents of that findings, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, not 45 pages were produced, not even 135. Yet still, the member for Choiseul Saltibus have the unmitigated gall to come to this house and critique a report because it is 45 pages long. Mr. Speaker, what is going on, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, what is wrong with asking Parliament to advise Cabinet to consider and approve the recommendations of this report? Mr. Speaker, so many times in life you make a decision, you think about something, you make a decision and you still go out and you ask people around you so you can fortify that decision, Mr. Speaker. So you can tweak certain things, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what is wrong with this government asking Parliament to do this, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, this speaks of a government of inclusivity, Mr. Speaker. This is what the member for Choiseul Saltibus have not understood about this Philip J. Pierre-led administration. It's a government that will never tell you that you are backing dog and you just bray and let you bray. This is not the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party, Mr. Speaker. We are a government that includes everybody. Mr. Speaker, the member indicates that a letter indicated the original St. Jude would cost $100 million to complete. Mr. Speaker, the fact is, they had the amount required to complete the original St. Jude's, Mr. Speaker. And the Prime Minister explained, you all had it at your disposal, but you all deliberately decided not to finish the original plans. The member for Viewfort South, upon assuming the reins of government, completed and continued to work on the original plans. And we heard that from the member for Castries North. But of course, Mr. Speaker, they needed to bite and bite and bite. And so they decided that they needed to eat. And so they went into new plans. Mr. Speaker, we never said concerns were not raised, Mr. Speaker, about the initial St. Jude site. We never said that, Mr. Speaker. The member for Castries East did not come here and say it was a perfect building. We explained that there were flaws. That is who we are. We come to this honorable house and we speak the truth. There were flaws. We admitted that. And we said that there were recommendations to fix the small issues, the snags. There were recommendations. That is what we said, Mr. Speaker. And so I sat down there, and I've never seen the member for Choiseul Saltibus so incoherent, so all over the place, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if it is because he was part of a signing ceremony. I wonder, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the fact is the box would have not been able to function on its own. We admit that. The box would have not been able to function on its own. They would have still needed to complete different processes with the original site. They still needed to go back to the original site. And so, Mr. Speaker, I dare say the 170 million would have probably still not been enough, because they would have had to go back to the original site, because the box couldn't stand by itself. And you come into this honorable house, Mr. Speaker, and you try to find reason to not endorse the move by this honorable Prime Minister to finish the original site. Mr. Speaker, I have to commend the nurses, doctors, and staff who have toiled night and day for all these years to ensure that the people in the South get decent services at the makeshift St. Jude's. Mr. Speaker, as St. Lucia's Minister of Sports, I must also say a heartfelt thank you to the coaches, to the administrators, the officials and athletes who have braved the frightening, dilapidated edifices of the venue that is currently the George Odlum Stadium. Mr. Speaker, they have endured challenges, training, and competing at this venue, Mr. Speaker. And we see their resilience as young Naomi London continues to progress from a Viewfort North, and Julian Alfred continues to take the world by storm, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the athletes and administrators, they had to set aside their interests. As the saying goes, the health of a nation is the wealth of a nation. And so, Mr. Speaker, as is often the case, the interests of sports had to be placed aside in the interests of other ministries, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, like others before me, I must turn my attention to the report that clear as day indicated that the original St. Jude's building was not only usable, but it would meet the medical demands of the people of the South, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, for years, of course, we were wondering why they did not publish that report. But of course, Mr. Speaker, as is clear to see, we know why. Of course, Mr. Speaker, despite having the largest cabinet in history, they decided to go another way. They decided to go the wrong way. Mr. Speaker, despite having a cabinet of ministers that boasted of having five former national athletes, the interests of the sportsmen and women of this nation were totally shoved aside, no pun intended. Mr. Speaker, the former Minister of Sport was once described as faster than a bullet from a gun. I remember the first time I heard this description of the former member for Denry South and seeing it myself. I was truly amazed at how quick this man truly was. But Starbatch came and ran him out. Mr. Speaker, he seemed to have sprinted away from what was best for the athletes, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, athletes such as Julian Alfred was set back, and of course, she had to continue training at that dilapidated venue. Mr. Speaker, the former Minister of Social Transformation was a national 400-meter runner. He was a founder of the Orion Track and Field Club. This man from Maritime Street, Grosley. But Mr. Speaker, he seemed to have pushed logic aside instead of completing St. Jude to return the George Odlum Stadium back to the athletes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the former Minister for National Security, Mr. Speaker, he has often been described by members in this House, including yourself, Mr. Speaker, as one of the more talented sportsmen in his time. But Mr. Speaker, instead of telling his leader to complete the project, Mr. Speaker, instead of telling the leader that young people need this venue for their programs as we continue to fight the scourge of crime, Mr. Speaker, he sat back, allowed the former Minister for Economic Development to play architect, to play engineer, contractor, and finance guru. They played around and vacillated. And of course, Mr. Speaker, we know that that project is still incomplete. Mr. Speaker, the former Minister of Culture was a former national volleyball player, Mr. Speaker. And I heard a decent tennis player as well. Mr. Speaker, she was a former permanent secretary in the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports. Mr. Speaker, she was president of the St. Lucia Olympic Committee. And yet still, despite a report stating clearly that the former government could have finished the initial St. Jude, she was busy defending the ridiculous assertion that colonialization had a conscience, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, our athletes, they have had to suffer the indignity of attempting to register their best times at that George Odlum Stadium. And of course, Mr. Speaker, for the first time in our history, we had an elected Prime Minister who could have said he was captain of a national team, captain of a national basketball team. Mr. Speaker, sadly, his failures on the basketball court as captain of Team St. Lucia led him to being replaced, Mr. Speaker, just as his failures as captain of the United Workers' Party led to his eventual sacking by the St. Lucian electorate, due in part to his mishandling of St. Jude, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while all the shenanigans were taking place with St. Jude's, our athletes had to suffer the injustice of playing second fiddle at George Odlum. Millions of dollars were being spent, Mr. Speaker, on Don Lockerbie. Not 1 cent in consideration for that George Odlum Stadium. Mr. Speaker, this hurts. Because instead of focusing on completing the original St. Jude's, within their first year, a facility that was nearly complete. Instead of doing this and quickly getting operations out of the George Odom Stadium, Mr. Speaker, we were hearing about turning a building in the north to the Madison Square Garden, Mr. Speaker. And somebody said it's the Marisol Square Gardens. Instead of finishing St. Jude's, returning it to our athletes, we are talking about developing the Madison Square Gardens, Mr. Speaker. And the sad thing is, while all this is happening, not 1 cent is put aside to rebuild the George Odom Stadium, Mr. Speaker. As a former national athlete, this really, really hurts. I mean, you had the option, complete St. Jude's, complete the original St. Jude's, a building that the previous UWP worked on, get the operations out of George Odom Stadium, rebuild the stadium. Yet a cabinet laced with former national athletes decided that it is better to just go around St. Lucia and turn natural grass into artificial surfaces, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, now a school like Mikusek have to now look everywhere to see where they can have the little inter-house competition, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I say again, some money could have been set aside for the reconstruction of that stadium instead of the millions put in the hands of Lockerbie. Mr. Speaker, despite having all these cabinet ministers with sports backgrounds, it can be argued that the millions of dollars in revenue from sports tourism was forgone. Mr. Speaker, we saw in the handover reports that genuinely they could have gotten out early enough for us to have started looking forward to hosting another Carifta Championships. Bring parents from all over the region and indeed the world to come and spend and invest their money in our sports tourism product. But no, they had to ensure that they did what they had to do, Mr. Speaker. Millions of dollars. While this previous administration indulged in verbal masturbations regarding St. Jude's, none of these ministers lobbied to ensure our sports tourism product in the South was protected, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we had a hospital very near completion, and instead of getting patients out and turning it over to sports administration or sports administrators for possible regional and international events, Mr. Speaker, we see that we are set back, Mr. Speaker, if we have any vision of hosting a Commonwealth Games in this country, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, my heart continues to go out to the young athletes in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the sad reality is that almost $118 million was already spent on that box, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over $118 million on a huge box. Think about it. Nearly $118 million. Mr. Speaker, as parliamentary representative for Grosile, that has to affect my soul. Mr. Speaker, Saga quasi chembwe, Mr. Speaker. Because, Mr. Speaker, in addition of taking all this money to only produce a box, Mr. Speaker, roads in the constituency of Grosile, Mr. Speaker, roads that were fine in the constituency of Grosile, while they take the money, spend $118 million in a box, a road from Corinth to Granivia, that was perfectly fine. They mash it up to fix it up, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, while it took $118 million to construct a box, Mr. Speaker, the roads in Inglewood and Piat were ignored. A green space, roads in Monnier were ignored. Roads and infrastructural works swept aside in Moshi, Mr. Speaker. Yet, Mr. Speaker, they want to play political football with the state of our roads in Grosile, knowing full well that they left the coffers empty after they took $118 million to construct a box, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a parliamentary representative for Grosile, I have to say that this is heartbreaking. Mr. Speaker, while it took $118 million to construct a box. The Grosile jetty for years was in a state of disrepair, Mr. Speaker. In less than 18 months, we got the jetty done in Grosile, Mr. Speaker. We got it done, Mr. Speaker. We negotiated, we pleaded, and of course, by any means legally necessary, no matter what they say, we got it done, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the infrastructure necessity in the community complete, similar to how St. Jude's Hospital will be completed under this member for Castries East, Mr. Speaker. So hold on strong, my people of Grosile. I've not left y'all. I'm here to serve. We'll continue to get it done. Power. Mr. Speaker, preliminary estimates indicate that it will take close to $36 million to complete just the bottom floor of the box monstrosity. $48 million to complete the bottom floor of the box monstrosity. Just the bottom floor. Mr. Speaker, can you imagine this? Mr. Speaker, as a Minister of Youth Development who is dying to construct a National Youth Development Center to provide a safe space for young people, to provide adequate space for crime-fighting programs, a National Academy for Performing Arts, for employability skills development programs, to host conferences for young people. Mr. Speaker, I cannot in good conscience say to this cabinet or to this Prime Minister to take $48 million and complete just a bottom floor, Mr. Speaker. How do I go to the NYC or to the National Students' Council and say to them that this government is truly serving your interests when we take $48 million, Mr. Speaker, just for a bottom floor, Mr. Speaker? And so, Mr. Speaker, just as the people of the South and St. Lucia was indeed thankful to their Prime Minister at the time and member for Parliament in Beaufort South, and of course, Honorable Mario Michel, for having constructed the George Odlum Stadium, Mr. Speaker, the youth and sports fraternity will be indeed thankful to this current Prime Minister for his vision and desire to give the athletes back their facility as soon as possible, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, I've heard the vacillations, Mr. Speaker. I've heard the political rhetoric, Mr. Speaker. I've heard the talk. I've seen the political football, Mr. Speaker. But now it is time to get it done, Mr. Speaker. It is time to get it done for not just the people of the South, but the people of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. Because, Mr. Speaker, we know, Mr. Speaker, that St. Lucia, the Eastern Caribbean, and the world is watching to see how we take care of our people, take care of our sick, our shut-in, and our elderly. And so we've seen election after election, the people go out to the polls and decide which government they are going to elect based on St. Jude's. And so, Mr. Speaker, as the member for Grosile, I feel, Mr. Speaker, that we must provide every support possible, not just as a cabinet, but as a parliament, to ensure that St. Jude is complete, not for us seated in this room, not for just our families, but for all of St. Lucia. Now is the time to put politics aside, and now is the time to deliver for our people. And so, Mr. Speaker, I therefore approve the recommendations presented by the Review Committee for the completion and commissioning of the St. Jude's Hospital to facilitate the move and transfer of operations from the George Odlum Stadium to the original St. Jude Hospital site, not because of politics, but because it's necessary and our people need it. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Beaufort South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I sound rather doleful this afternoon, this evening rather, it has to do with my overwhelming sadness about the saga of the St. Jude Hospital. For my part, Mr. Speaker, I have always regarded the succeeding events surrounding that hospital as a monumental tragedy. And why would I have used such terms, Mr. Speaker? The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that the citizens of this country, and in particular the citizens of the South, have been denied quality health care. Some have died because of substandard facilities at the current St. Jude Hospital. And this has nothing to do with the dedication of the doctors and nurses. It has to do with the facilities themselves and what is available to treat the people of the South. A recurring theme too, Mr. Speaker, of all the presentations we have heard has been the millions of dollars wasted, literally lost, gone into the wind. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, it's important that those figures be repeated ad nauseum because of the very powerful lessons and implications involved in what has occurred at the St. Jude Hospital. What occurred there must, frankly, never ever be repeated in the annals of this country. Never happened. And all politicians should tread very carefully henceforth. We are told, Mr. Speaker, that after the general elections of 2016, that at August 2016, the overall expenditure of the St. Jude Hospital Reconstruction Project, Phase 1, and put it more colorfully, what was left behind by the government that I led, was estimated at $98,451,346.85. And Mr. Speaker, you are welcome to check the report. I think it is at page 20 to confirm. We do know, however, that at least 118 million was 116 million was a likely expenditure at the time because there were unpaid bills to come in. And the burden has fallen on this government, actually, Mr. Speaker, to pay some of the contractors who have not been paid. Obi Sadhu, for example, up to last year had not been paid, and I believe efforts are now being paid to meet his contract costs, costing him millions, and the result of that he has suffered badly because, as you know, money owed without payment of sufficient interest is a significant loss. But he too fell between the cracks, and there are others. And so when I hear the very pious comments being made about what took place, the pain of what was involved is never explained or understood or grasped. The lives that have been compromised and etc. just seem to mean nothing to those who make those comments. Now, on July 29, 2021, Mr. Speaker, the cumulative expenditure on the box and dubbed, as you know, as St. Jude Hospital Reconstruction Project as Phase 2. And of course, I notice members are liberally using the term box and give me no credit for coining that term. I am in fact legendary in creating terms in this House, Mr. Speaker, for which I suspect I may deserve a medal of a special kind. But not the one that others think of, Mr. Speaker, but, and rightfully speaking, the description of the box is correct, but I'll come to that in greater detail. The cumulative expenditure, that is from its commencement in February 2019 to July 2021, amounted to 118.05 million. And again, this is to be found in the report at page 15, Mr. Speaker. It says, according to SJHRP status report dated 29 July 2021 and prepared by the NAO, the cumulative expenditure on SJHRP2 Phase 2 from commencement in February 2019 to July 2021 amounts to 118.05 million. Now, that's what the report says. And it says that some 89.3 million had been paid to date and some 28.74 million outstanding. So that's at page 15, Mr. Speaker. Now, we have to take into consideration, Mr. Speaker, the ground floor, which is an issue because the former government had intended to operationalize the ground floor, and they've floated the proposal of completing the ground floor, occupying the ground floor, and then, of course, continue construction on the second floor and third floor, so that in reality, therefore, Mr. Speaker, we would have had the absurd situation of patients being housed in the ground floor and construction taking place, if at all, on the second and third floor, pounding away during the day and possibly who knows what time, etc. That was the solution, the proposal. And you know, I sit back, Mr. Speaker, and reflect, and you wonder sometimes about the sanity of the former government, because it was also the government that floated the proposal of building a COVID hospital on Rat Island. So the logic of some of these proposals, Mr. Speaker, compels me to ask issues about the sanity of the former government and what really motivated and governed the positions that the government at the time had taken. Now, Mr. Speaker, my presentation will be cast more in terms of the public policy implications and the issues of governance, but I'll come more to that. Now, Mr. Speaker, we are told that this ground floor would cost $48 million. So when we add the 48 million to the 118 million, then immediately that is taking us to $166 million. Meaning, Mr. Speaker, that the box, the structure, plus the ground floor, and the expenditure, cumulative expenditure, would have taken you to $166 million. Say that again? 60 more million for the roof, yes. I wish we had those details. Every time we asked the former Minister of Finance to give an estimate of what the box would eventually cost, he pointedly refused. And I know the member for Swaziland remember this very well because it was a constant issue with me when I sat on the opposition bench. I would ask, what is the cost of the hospital? Now, at least in the case of the former government, the government that I led, Mr. Speaker, and of course, thanks to the member for Swaziland, thinking, of course, he had a point. I mean, he gleefully noted that the former permanent secretary had put the cost at 178 million. The point is that we did have an estimated cost. It was at 178 million, as the former permanent secretary had indicated. And that, of course, would have included the cost of equipment and facilities of the hospital. So what we are talking is about raw construction costs of 116, 118 million, plus, of course, the inevitable equipment, etc., that had to be procured, Mr. Speaker. So I invite you, Mr. Speaker, to look at the balance. A box, incomplete, 118 million, 48 million for the first floor, 166 million. St. Jude, under the former government, at the general elections, 98 million, but being suggested by the permanent secretary that ultimately the cost will be 178 billion, completed with equipment, etc. The gap, Mr. Speaker, in dollar terms is about $10, $11 million, as you can see. Mr. Speaker, in all my years, I have never experienced a project under construction without an estimated cost. Even if such costs, Mr. Speaker, have had to be revised because of one reason or another, and of course the term that the then opposition liked was cost overruns that it made a carnival out of. But inevitably in presentations like this, I'm always reflective. Reflective about our behavior, the reactions of our public service, the reactions of our people, how we handle things. But you know what came to mind, Mr. Speaker? What came to mind? Here you have a major project under construction with borrowed funds, finance, Mr. Speaker, by direct award contracts. You spend 118 million. You hear talk that a foundation which should have cost 3 to 4 million ended up costing 9 million. And yet the audit department of this country stays silent, not a word, not one word from the audit department. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? They would instead go and investigate, years earlier, a bridge costing $11 million at Bois d'Orange because one or two politicians stood up and suggested there was corruption in the award and in the costing of the bridge. The finance minister was then the minister in the Ministry of Infrastructure. I was the prime minister at the time. And these are the things, Mr. Speaker, the duplicity that is so inherent in how we administer the affairs of the country. This is what unnerves me, annoys me, and arouses my passions. You know, if you want me to go further, when I think of the wastage that has occurred at St. Jude Hospital, I inevitably go back to the Rochamel affair where I was accused of maladministration because a cost overrun of $14.5 million was paid to allow the hotel to survive, to continue to employ workers, eventually leading to its sale. I was accused of maladministration. What then is the word that must be invoked to describe what has taken place in St. Jude? Is it maladministration or something far deeper, more complex than maladministration? But you know, Mr. Speaker, I'm talking about the public policy fallout, the implications for governance, etc. What I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, is that whether we want to accept it or not, the failure to complete St. Jude Hospital has caused a major deterioration in the quality of health care delivered to the people of St. Lucia. Had our health facilities been in better shape, had the former government completed St. Jude and followed the program, been faithful to the project, we would have handled COVID far better than we did. People would not have died needlessly. And Mr. Speaker, you know my position, I've said it repeatedly, that we have to be strong and brave and at some point review our handling of COVID in this country so that the lessons are learned and we never ever repeat the mistakes that occurred during that period. Then, Mr. Speaker, there is this debate as to, there's this issue as to whether the UWP's replacement, the former government's replacement hospital, the box, would have been a level 5 facility. meaning only 70 beds, or a level 4 facility with 90 beds. The member for Swazelle was rather economical in his interpretation of what the report contained. I do have a slightly different view. Let us turn to page 16 of the report, Mr. Speaker, and see whether an interpretation can be provided. It says, the ministry officials confirmed that they did not sign off on the final drawings that were sent to the DCA for approval. Only the conceptual drawings prepared in 2009 were forwarded to the ministry. The ministry also advised that based on their analysis, St. Jude should be a 70-bed level 5 facility. Now you have to take, my law training says to me, you have to take the whole paragraph together and read the thing in context. You can't take the sentence out in isolation. So the question is whether it would have been a 70-bed level 5 or a 90 as contended by the member for Swazelle, a level 4 90 beds. But look at page 14. And the member for Swazelle politely declined to turn his eye to page 14 because it says at the very bottom, it is to be noted that in discussions with the Ministry of Health, they indicated that the hospital is a level 5 facility and not a level 4. And this error was perpetuated despite clarification. Now, I leave it to you for interpretation. I leave it for you for interpretation of what really was in. But I'll tell you this, and this is my point. If it is the case that the final product would have been a 70-bed hospital, then it means the people of Uford would have been shortchanged. They would have suffered again because it would be a facility that would certainly not have answered all their needs. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? We have already made a monumental error with the Owen King Hospital, OKU Hospital. You know why? The design which the Labour Party left behind when we lost the general election in 2006, the hospital was supposed to have 5 fingers, they cut off 1 because they said too much money, and the result is we have a hospital now that cannot cope with the capacity and never has enough beds to cope with the needs of St. Lucians who are ill and well. We are paying the price for our foolishness. We are paying the price for our bigotry. We are paying the price for our vanity. We are destroying people's lives. That's what we are doing all the time. Why do we do it? Because of short-sightedness, as I said, Mr. Speaker. And I feel very strongly about these things, not because it is the government that I led that was responsible for negotiating for the Owen King EU Hospital. You never hear me claim it as perhaps I should, Mr. Speaker. You don't hear me saying so. But I know full well the history of it. I know how the money was obtained. I know how it was designed. I know whose project it is. But Mr. Speaker, how can we make decisions like that impacting on people's lives so easily, and we're so indifferent? How could a hospital of 70 beds in Beaufort conceivably meet the requirements and the needs of the people of the South in a situation where we know that we do not have enough capacity at the Owen King EU Hospital? But you know, Mr. Speaker, I'm talking of wastage and public policy issues. The fact of the matter is that most of the money that financed the St. Jude Hospital came from borrowed funds. And whether we like it or not, the cost of St. Jude has contributed to our debt portfolio. We can jump high, we can jump low, that is the reality. And when you're going to add the 166 million and the 98 million spent by the previous government, then you are talking easily, of course, over 200 and odd million dollars already gone. And most of that money came from bonds borrowed and other government instruments like treasury bills, and of course we know about the loan. So to repeat, Mr. Speaker, if we had the cost of phase 1 and phase 2, we get a total expenditure to date of approximately $216.55 million. And as I said, this does not include the completion cost of the box. But we now have to look to the future, and that will also have to include the yet undisclosed costs of completing phase 1. But you know, Mr. Speaker, these are not the only costs we have to bear. That's not the only cost we have to bear. When we are properly analyzing the public policy positions that we take on these issues, the picture must be made clear. The fact of the matter, Mr. Speaker, is this, that we now have to spend millions and millions of dollars to reclaim the George Odlum Stadium. Whether we like it or not, the conversion of the stadium into a hospital meant that the deterioration was accelerated and we lost the capacity to repair the stadium. Whether we can really effectively repair that stadium or take it down and build a new one is going to be the next big question. And my constituency will not suffer. I've had enough to bear. It's not suffering. Not anymore. So we have a major decision to make as to what will happen to these costs, therefore, must be computed in the overall cost. It is collateral expenditure, my friend. You put it right. But you know, Mr. Speaker, look at what it has done to our politics. Look at what it has done. And a member of Swazell did well. He put it nicely. He said he wants peace. He doesn't want to fight the next election and the hospital is not completed. He says so. He says he wants the hospital to be completed. I know a lot of you don't believe him, but I believe him. I believe the member of Swazell, because I can't see how the UWP could ever resist the possibility that the hospital is incomplete before the general elections. They would want it to remain incomplete. There's no question about that. They would love it. You see, Mr. Speaker, there's a reason why I like to goad him. Because you see, whenever I provoke him and I goad him, he says things he should know. You hear him still saying he's not a politician? Yeah. But the cost is also what this has done to our political system, to us. There is political exhaustion, disbelief in the political system, widespread distrust and loss of confidence. People are no longer trusting us to make decisions because they believe that we have shortchanged them, we have not told them the truth, we have not handled issues responsibly, and it has allowed unnecessary cynicism to creep into the political system. I wish I could properly explain this, Mr. Speaker, because when I meet my constituents and they look at the passage of time and the issues that have surrounded St. Jude, they feel it's sometimes very hard to believe the narratives that they're hearing. That's the reality. And the fundamental question is why we allowed it. Why did it happen? Why did we let it to happen? But the tragedy is that it is our people, their health, their well-being that has paid the price. I ask, Mr. Speaker, how is it that so many were duped into believing and accepting that the decision of the former government to build the box was wise, correct, and justified? How? Because there are people to this day who justify it, who believe that it is the right thing. It was the right thing then, it is the right thing now. So who really must take responsibility for it? Should the politicians alone be blamed? Or should the people of this country also accept responsibility for allowing this to happen? For watching it happen? For not interrupting it? Who really should be bearing all the blame for the saga of St. Jude? Mr. Speaker, I leave that question and will return to it. But I believe that this is an opportune occasion to reflect and to ask the question, how did we get to where we are today? Mr. Speaker, let us retrace our steps very, very quickly though. When the St. Lucia Labour Party assumed office in 2011, we found the following. Cyril Donnelly, construction company, was a contractor on site. The former government opted to award contracts by direct purchase. I have no fault in this. I find no fault in this because I believe this was to avoid delays in the procurement of services, and the government felt it had a responsibility to get the hospital done as quickly as possible. The Halcor Group Limited was the chosen consultants. No completed drawings or designs were available. The former government, again, on reflection, we can perhaps say unwisely, but we can debate it. They had decided that given the urgency of completing the hospital, it was best to proceed by phased drawings and approvals, and given the phased nature of the project, drawings and completed drawings could not be made available at one shot. It was either to adopt this phased approach or to stop, do all the designs, then submit to the Development Control Authority for approvals, and then after approvals recommence. They decided that given the pressure that was exerted, it was not a wise approach. Shanta King was a project coordinator for the project management unit created by the government of St. Lucia to oversee the project. No funds were available to finance the project. The former government had opted to finance piecemeal, bit by bit, design and build as money became available. We never inherited a pool of money to work on the hospital. Now, Mr. Speaker, what did the incoming government do? I opted to keep the inherited arrangements even though I knew the political sympathies and affiliations of the key personnel involved. And I say I because I was aware that there was dissension within my own cabinet as to whether some of those persons should be retained, but on this matter I felt I had responsibility and I insisted that they be retained because I wanted no interruption or disruption. I wanted continuity because I wanted to see the hospital completed. I felt that it would not be in the interest of the people of St. Lucia to disrupt the progress of the project. So I retained them, I kept them. But problems soon arose, Mr. Speaker, and briefly let us go through these problems. First, money had to be secured. The government eventually turned to Taiwan to raise a loan of US $20 million to finance ongoing construction. And this loan is significant because it marks the turning point of Taiwan's approach to St. Lucia, apart from the usual grant given at budget time to assist with projects like the constituency development project. The government of Taiwan had decided not to make available any additional funds, but make available funds by way of loans, enter the Export Bank of Taiwan, and now all money that is made available are loans, for which, of course, in due course, we will have to pay. The contractor, Cyril Donnelly, presented major challenges. Major challenges. His workers complained constantly that their wages were not paid on time. There's no Wednesday I went down to before I didn't have a whole set of workers at the hospital coming to me and asking me to make arrangements for payment that Mr. Donnelly was claiming he got no money from the government, which I shall come to in a few minutes. Their wages were not paid on time. But it also became clear, Mr. Speaker, that the quality of his work was substandard. In 2000, I believe it was in 2013, for example, if you check at page 2 of one of the interim reports, Mr. Speaker, which of course you do not have, the House does not have, but an interim report, I believe, made available, Mr. Speaker, sometime in 2013, an earlier report, Mr. Speaker. This is what it says. No works were conducted in the month of November and December due to the contractor, Cyril Donnelly Construction Company Limited, failing to address instructions given by the consultant, Halco Group Limited, to demolish concrete of substandard quality in various areas. As a result, the contractor was instructed to refrain from further concrete works until the issue was addressed. So there was absolutely no question that there was an issue of quality of performance by the then contractor. Now, Mr. Speaker, the point is further echoed then in that same interim report at page 6. It says, due to poor performance of the contractor, Cyril Donnelly Construction Company Limited, in implementing the civil component of the works, it is recommended that the contractor be replaced to ensure timely and efficient completion of the work components. Now, I am deliberately repeating this, not because I want to cause any injury to Cyril Donnelly. I have no such desire. But I am repeating it because, you see, Mr. Speaker, it was said that I was the author of the removal of Cyril Donnelly for political reasons. That was never ever the case. In fact, he had to be removed because he was a substandard contractor performing substandard work. That was the reality. And once his removal was complete, then the construction company, Obisadu Construction, was invited to take over. Now, interestingly, Mr. Speaker, and this is fascinating, during this period, by then, Cyril Donnelly Construction had earned $49,352,007.28 for the work carried out at St. Jude Hospital. This had nothing to do with the incoming St. Lucia Labour Party administration. Had earned $49 million. I mean, look, money, $49 million, Mr. Speaker. And for confirmation, Mr. Speaker, I think you can look at the technical report at page 174. It says, Mr. Speaker, that is the interim report of the technical audit of St. Jude Hospital reconstruction project that has already been referred to. And I echo the cries of members of the House who say this report should be made available to the House and to the public. It really should be made available. It says, the records indicate that Cyril Donnelly was awarded 7 contracts with the respective sums of $510,417.50, $8,615,245.23, $3,805,426, $805,426, $12,435,917, $6,080,000, $3,640,000, $14,265,000 over the period 31st August 2010 to 6th August 2012, totaling $49,352,007.28. That, Mr. Speaker, is the amount earned by that company, notwithstanding the suspicions and the anxieties regarding the quality of his work. So all in all, Mr. Speaker, the government that I led was motivated by two factors. The first was the overriding need to complete the hospital as quickly as possible. But I knew from my experience with the Owen King EU Hospital, construction of hospitals took time. OKU had taken at least 8 years from sod turning to opening. And even at opening, there were facilities that were incomplete. Hospitals take time. That is why, Mr. Speaker, when I sat on the opposition benches, I repeatedly warned the then Minister of Economic Development that it would have been impossible to complete the hospital before the general election. Now, all of you know how much I was berated, ridiculed by the member. I mean, some really ugly things were said, including, of course, testing my intellectual mettle and integrity. I mean, the gentleman I remember sitting on one side looked at me and said, "You have no friends. Everybody has friends, but you have no friends." I mean, that's the kind of thing that took place in this house. You know, it's the kind of thing that happened during that period. But he would not listen. The government would not listen. And if humility had been the order of the day, then perhaps a lot of this would have been not avoided, but minimized. So that was the first thing. And this overriding compulsion to complete the hospital as quickly as possible meant that we kept what we had inherited in place. Was it a mistake? It may well have been, but it may not have been a mistake equally, given what we have said about the time span it takes to complete hospitals. The second thing is this, Mr. Speaker, and I believe the entire cabinet shared this, every person in that cabinet shared this. We were determined that the people of the South were not discriminated against. We were determined that they were not treated unfairly. We were determined that they would not be given a facility that was substandard with inadequate or outdated equipment, as is usually the case. Because that's how they treat the people in the South. You don't need this. You can do it a second hand. We were determined that those things would have ended and the people of the South would have had a hospital with modern equipment, with scanners, just like the OKEU would have had. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, we took the decision to build on what had been inherited and allow us an expanded hospital to ensure that the needs of the people of the South were met in entirety, and that we did not have to depend solely on the Owen King EU Hospital for treatment and for care. So that's where we were, Mr. Speaker. And then, after the drama of the general elections of 2016, that election intervened. And you notice I say it's the drama of the elections, because it had a lot of drama to it, notwithstanding the fact that I lost the general elections. It did have its bit of drama that from time to time I reflect on. Immediately, the rumors started. The rumors began. Allegations of widespread corruption. People were accused of taking away materials for their own use. Politicians were accused of taking building materials to build homes. Some firms and individuals were falsely accused directly. And I remember True Value. And each time something happens in the South, the reputation of True Value is attacked, injured. Every time. Sometimes I wonder, how do these people forgive for what has been said about them, done to them, the damage to their integrity and honor, how do they bring themselves to forgive those who have committed those wrongs? I reflect on that all the time. I reflect on this notion of forgiveness all the time. How do you deal with those things? The former government then decided that it would go one step further to appoint FDL Consult Limited to do this technical report. There are two things about this report I wish to say. Firstly, like everybody else before me, I think it is important to cite the passage which appears at page 162 of the audit. I think even the member for Swazelle reflected on that, perhaps it's a copy that I have. It's on page 13 of this interim report. It says, that is the section that suggests that it is possible to rehabilitate the hospital and produce a hospital of a certain quality, certain defects are looked at. So I'm not going to bother. The drift of it is understood. Now today, we are getting a gloss on the interpretation and a most remarkable gloss by the member for Swazelle that they're talking of a facility, not hospital, and etc. It's a remarkable gloss, but I don't think I should take that gloss on. I know that there are others to follow me and they might be tempted to do so. So I would leave it to them to take on. But Mr. Speaker, I want to invite you to consider the passage in the audit report at page 183. It may be, Mr. Speaker, that you do not have that specific report because I'm dealing with an interim report, Mr. Speaker. And I'm citing it for a very important reason because you see, Mr. Speaker, everyone has focused on that judgment about whether you continue St. Jude's or not, but not the other things said in that report. And I want to read it out, Mr. Speaker, and draw it to your attention. It says, and I want you to bear in mind, Mr. Speaker, that the author of this report is FDL Consults. And then you'll see why in a few minutes. Quote, the construction of the project should not proceed in this fragmented, poorly coordinated manner without a clear completion strategy. Can you believe it? This is what they said. Based on preliminary estimates, a further EC 100 million is required to complete the facility, meaning phase one. However, there remains many unanswered questions, including inter alia. How does St. Jude Hospital reflect and respond to the National Health Service needs, policy and direction? That's a good question, especially because the author is an engineer. As you know, engineers have limitations in how they think. What is the level of specialized services to be provided considering the newly constructed but non-commissioned Owen King EU Hospital? Again, a good question, a reasonable question that an engineer should ask. And C, is the human resource capacity available to have a fully operational facility if completed in its present form? Now, that was disingenuous because there was enough evidence to answer the question. But nevertheless, he asked this. But you know, you have to show the social dimensions of the profession from time to time. You know, you have to admit of a wider remit. So he asked. And then he says, additionally, a holistic design for the St. Jude Hospital does not exist. Words, man, words. A holistic design for the St. Jude Hospital does not exist. The main reason for this Herculean-ness. Words, my friend, words from an engineer. It is therefore recommended that the construction be further suspended, a master plan developed, and align the existing facility, if possible, with that plan with an overarching national plan. A phasing plan will also be necessary considering the cost, completion, and reconfiguration. The strategy for completion will be informed by a master plan. Recognizing the significant delay in implementation, a design-build approach may be considered as a procurement route to complete. However, the employer requirement must be detailed and well articulated, unquote. Additionally, a holistic design for the St. Jude Hospital does not exist. The main reason for this Herculean mess. Now you may say it's theater on my part. Mr. Speaker, I was, like you, most astonished when I read this in the report. And Mr. Speaker, I want you to reflect on it, Mr. Speaker. But do you know what, Mr. Speaker? Do you know that none of the things that was said by that consultant that I just read in that paragraph was done by the former government? None whatsoever. If you ask the former government to name one item consistent with the recommendations contained in that paragraph or the paragraphs that I read, they cannot name one. And I invite the member for Sozel to stand on his feet and say, yes, I know of one. He can't.
Yes, I know.
You think I should have really do that? Let him stand up? And he has to face music after? Now, Mr. Speaker, I like to call a spade a spade. Some people will never like me. Let me tell them it doesn't matter. Not anymore. It doesn't matter to me whether you like me or not. But tell me, how could the consultant who expressed these views turn around and accept a contract to design a new hospital, the box that we are talking about, without adhering to the same admonitions he articulated in that report? That's the thing that baffles me. And I ask you the further question because on the line my approach has been those public policy issues and issues of governance, Mr. Speaker. How could things ever be right in this country when we tolerate conflict of interest of such magnitude that the writer of a report turns around, designs a facility, and is responsible for the approach taken for the design of the facility? And in fact, he ends up doing the very same things which he condemned in the report. How can we allow those things to exist in this country? That's my question, Mr. Speaker. The consultant says that a holistic design for the St. Jude's Hospital does not exist. Yet he proceeds to accept a brief, and the same thing that was condemned happened. Construction of the box commenced without approved plans. Recall, Mr. Speaker, that this was one of the allegations against the administration which I led. But I'll make some statements, Mr. Speaker, and let us look at this issue of approvals. You know, Mr. Speaker, that famous aphorism comes to mind. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when we first practice to deceive. This is a popular aphorism. It's not Shakespearean, I think. It is of the famous novelist and poet Sir Walter Scott, uttered, I believe, in 1808. And this is what this saga of St. Jude is about. Would it have made a difference to the people of this country if we had told them the truth, the whole truth of what we are doing and why? Would it have made a difference to this country if we did not allow vanity to parade before our eyes and do nothing about it? Would it have made a difference to this country if the first phase was completed and people were housed in that hospital? Would it have made a difference? Would it have made a difference to grieving families, those who've lost loved ones because of inadequate treatment at the St. Jude Hospital because of the difficult conditions that doctors and nurses had to operate with? And you know, Mr. Speaker, just look at this history of approvals because it figured so prominently in the debate. And each time I go to the then member for economic development and ask him, where are your approved plans? He would laugh or smile and away. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me just go through some.
Member for Viewwood South, you have 10.5 minutes left.
Wow, what did you say, Mr. Speaker? I didn't hear you. Yes, I think today I want more time. It's owed to me. I think half an hour in the first instance will be fine. If I need more, I'll let you know.
John? 46. Mr. Speaker, no, the section. The exact section, 48? It's 48 or 46?
32, I think. 52.
Mr. Speaker,
Proceed, Prime
Mr.
Minister.
Speaker, I would like to ask that the member for Beaufort South be allowed an extra 45 minutes to complete his presentation.
Members, the question is that Standing Order 32-8 be suspended to allow the member for Beaufort South an additional 45 minutes. And I'll put the question, as many as have that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as have a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Proceed, member.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, in reviewing the history of these approvals and what in fact occurred, I will advance that the Development Control Authority was rather complicit in this whole affair and perhaps did not behave as professionally as they should have done. But I'll come to that in a few minutes. When the former government lost the general elections in 2016, there can be no question that detailed plans had in fact been submitted to the Development Control Authority, Mr. Speaker. There can be no question. But the Development Control Authority decided to defer approval of the application. And here, Mr. Speaker, there are reasons. And here, Mr. Speaker, there are reasons for it. They said that they wanted to resolve the following: a presentation by the Planning Department of the Ministry of Finance on the proposal. What value to that, I really don't know. Submission of air conditioning circulation system indicating ventilation solutions for rooms including the ground floor toilets, in dialysis building, ground floor toilet in a warehouse, toilet, ambulance and monitoring building, toilet washrooms in the morgue building, the toilet in the gym, first floor toilet, the developer to submit public health approval for the remainder of the development, the developer to submit endorsements from public health, the developer to abide with recommendations of the Ministry of Health for the sewage treatment plant. So they seem to be preoccupied with toilets and health related issues. So they decided to defer pending, and there's a letter of April 22nd because of their preoccupation with toilets. The letter read, the Development Control Authority considered your application for the retention of use of an existing institutional building block. You see how far removed they are from it? Block 1021B, parcel 348, OJV4. Kindly be informed that on April 20th, 2016, the Board of the DCA deferred your application pending resolution of the following. A presentation by the Planning Department of the Ministry of Finance on the proposal. Submission of air conditioning circulation system indicating ventilation solutions for all rooms, including, as I said, the ground floor toilet, etc., etc., etc. Should you, and then it goes on, should you require further information or clarification, feel free to visit our office. So that is the Development Control Authority to the then Permanent Secretary, dated April 22nd, 2016, on the eve of the general election. But the fact is, they did have completed plans before them. There can be no question. There can be no question about that. Now, Mr. Speaker, what was the approach of the former government? Their application was numbered 59219. And you recall, Mr. Speaker, or members will recall, Mr. Speaker, that every time the question was asked, we never ever got a response. And I stood up repeatedly in this house, challenging the member for then member for Castries South, and telling him that he has no approved plans. Yeah, I'm sorry, Southeast, sorry. Southeast. But listen to this. Application 59219 was approved on December 20th, 2019. 6 or 7, a few months, of course, before 2020 and then January election 21, with the following conditions. And I'm repeating those conditions because I want you just to analyze this properly to understand the mindset. Listen to this. Professional indemnity insurance from the designer FDL Consult for the architectural component to be provided. Proper site plan showing relevant site information to include site boundaries, adjacent features, all structures, and the status, parking areas, ramps, etc. Health approval from the Department of Health to be provided. Fire approval from the Fire Department to be provided. Traffic management plan during construction and operational stage from the Department of Infrastructure to be provided. Solid waste management plan approved by the Solid Waste Authority to be provided. All MEP drawings to be submitted and certified by a locally registered electrical and mechanical engineer. Now that's under which, those are conditions on which the latest building was considered and the drawings released. Now, come on, honorable members. Compare all those requirements laid down by the DCA, allowing the project to continue, and contrast that now with the requirement demanded of the former Labour Party administration, where only the issue has to do with some toilets. And it was deferred. What explains this? How could a development control authority grant approval for a building and a building financed by the public of St. Lucia, paid for from the income of taxpayers, not from income of taxpayers, from the revenue derived from taxpayers of this country? How could that happen? And you then grant development approval and all of these things are outstanding. How do you explain this? I'll tell you, I'll give you one clue, Mr. Speaker. Listen to this, Mr. Speaker. A meeting of the Development Control Authority on January 6, 2020. It says, quote, upon the conclusion of the discussions on all areas of concern emanating from the application, there was consensus amongst all persons present at the meeting. The chairman of the DCA agreed to have the architectural component package stamped and signed without architectural certification and indicated that the liability would be left to the designer. The designer, Mr. Fontenard, also assured the DCA that all the outstanding requirements as per letter dated December 23, 2019 attached would be submitted in packages. Can I ask you, honorable members, what is the difference in approach to what was condemned, save and accept that this approach is one of impunity, it is outrageous, unacceptable, and our DCA was complicit in allowing this nonsense to take place in this country. Now they'll tell you I'm hard on civil servants, I have a beef against civil servants, that's what they usually tell you. But I have said, Mr. Speaker, I will call a spade, and it's time that we clean up what exists. This state of affairs cannot be allowed to continue. What is Mr. Fontenard doing at a meeting at which approval is being given and decision is being made about a major project like this? And how could Mr. Fontenard be part of this, Mr. Speaker, when he condemned the very same things in his own report? How then do you to take this report seriously? What is the professional judgment that you should cast on this audit report? And why is the government withholding the report? Why? Why? The report has to be made available. And you know why it has to be made available? Because the people of St. Lucia must know what they must never ever tolerate in the future again. That we must not tolerate double standards like that. Conflicts of interest. And you can't come and tell me that when I protected the workers of this country by meeting $14.5 million to allow a hotel to operate, that you want to accuse me of every living opportunity you get of maladministration of all kinds of things. The hotel is there, it's operating, it's paid all its taxes, workers are still there. And then these kinds of things take place in this country and not a word. The fact of the matter, Mr. Speaker, is that the government of the day now faces some very hard, some very difficult choices. Mr. Speaker, the truth of the matter, Mr. Speaker, is this. My constituents are tired. They want their hospital. They really have had enough. That's the honest truth. Medical practitioners, doctors, nurses are all fed up. And Mr. Speaker, I'm happy that in this resolution before the House, that, Mr. Speaker, we have included a paragraph 4 which says that the Parliament of St. Lucia, cognizant of the distressing conditions of the St. Jude Hospital at the George Odlum National Stadium, further expresses its profound gratitude to the doctors, nurses, staff, and patients for their contribution, dedication, patience, and commitment over the years. I hope, Mr. Speaker, that someday we can find a mechanism to reward and thank those doctors and nurses at St. Jude for what they have endured. I really hope so, Mr. Speaker. I have been to that hospital so often. I have seen my own family at that hospital in their closing days of their lives. I've seen constituents, Mr. Speaker, and it's remarkable what the doctors have had to do in the circumstances in which they operate. But it's not just my constituents and medical practitioners. The people of St. Lucia are frustrated. They too have had enough. I think every time they hear the word St. Jude, they breathe and take a deep sigh. And so it is good that we are trying to bring this sorry chapter to an end. Mr. Speaker, I said earlier that the box had already cost the people of this country some $118 million without any costing of all 3 floors. The cost of equipment is not included. If the cost of the first floor is included based on the old estimate, then the total will be $166 million. That is just the first floor. This is without any costing, as I said, for the next 2 floors and equipment. I believe that if the government has to go the route of the former administration and complete this box, then easily, I think we are probably looking at an overall cost somewhere between $250 million and $300 million. That's the reality that faces. And I say so guardedly, Mr. Speaker. I'm not an expert. I don't quantify. But I believe I have had some accumulated experience in these matters. And given what has happened in the last couple of years with inflation and the rising cost of building materials, I don't think that this is far-fetched. What then is the government to do in this environment? And when you have to face the reality that the money to complete the hospital will likely have to be borrowed, or some kind of a bold arrangement or other arrangement be put in place to finance the hospital. So the reality is that we face. The government therefore has a duty to ensure that the quickest solution to ease the pain and the burden of the people of this country is the most and the best solution at this time. That's the reality that we face. That is the reality that we face. We can't tarry anymore. We have to look at the least cost option. But what of the structure we have there at St. Jude? What of the box? What do we do? And this resolution, Mr. Speaker, invites the Parliament of St. Lucia to advise the Cabinet of Ministers to explore other sustainable opportunities for the St. Jude Hospital site. And it is in that context that I speak. Mr. Speaker, inheriting the mistakes of your predecessor and resolving the mistakes of your predecessor is part of the responsibility of an incumbent government. We are all inheritors. How we choose to deal with what we inherit is an important issue because it will disclose our wisdom, our sagacity. It will disclose whether we understood what people are saying to us, whether we understand fully how our people think. But that's part of the responsibility of politics, to inherit what your predecessor has done. The question then is, what do you do with the inheritance? And we all have different ways of dealing with those issues. In a previous presentation, I lamented the fact that this building, the box, has compromised the landscape of my constituency of the area of Condolences. I've said it. I am not happy with it, Mr. Speaker. I am not happy that when I reach the gap to turn from Condolences into Auger, I see this monstrosity standing before me. And by the way, it is causing serious damage to houses on the other side of the road because no drainage has been properly provided and people's homes are being flooded, and the Ministry of Infrastructure is not giving me money to build drains in the area to resolve the problem. All right. Now, Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is, my people in Beaufort are fed up of ugly and derelict buildings. We're really tired. I have repeatedly spoken to Invested Lucia and SLASPA about the ugly buildings they have on the way going to the airport, that it is time they clean up that area. I am losing patience, and I repeat that something has to be done about that area, and there is need to remove and to end some operations taking place along that highway. We are tired in Beaufort, very tired. And time is of essence to deal with those issues. But if we do nothing about the box, it too will become a derelict building. The more the building remains unattended, the more the structure will deteriorate. And in this business, you will know that unoccupied buildings deteriorate exponentially. Something about the lack of occupation causes it. And you just look at the St. Jude Hospital Phase 1. The challenge just to clean it up after all of these years. But you know, we also have to be different from our predecessor government. They allow the old hospital deliberately to deteriorate so they can then have a reason to take tractors and put through it and destroy the whole thing. Never mind all this talk about creating some university or teaching hospital. You're going to create a teaching hospital and let the backs take over the hospital and cost $5 million to go and clean up the hospital, and that is an added cost. I was speaking about wastage of money. That is another example of the wastage of money. What is the true cost of this episode? These are the things we have to consider. My view, Mr. Speaker, I have said in this House before, and it is nothing new. I believe that the building should be put out to tender and private developers be invited to complete the building and operate it as a specialized hospital. I believe there's room to do that. And I believe that the lease payments should go to amortizing the total costs of completing and operationalizing the hospital, meaning that whatever money the developer puts in the building to complete and operationalize the hospital, that be phased into lease payments over time, for which, of course, the amount is not paid until the capital costs are met. I think we have to be bold in this matter. I am also suggesting that it is an opportunity. It's not one to be ignored or to be rejected. I'll tell you what, Mr. Speaker. The promise of developing Vieux Fort as a university site also must be finally addressed, I think. What do we do with the schools that are operating in Vieux Fort and whether we now integrate? Mr. Speaker, I raise this not because of the economic, not just because of the economic value of the operations of these universities to the community of Vieux Fort, because I am fully aware of the number of households who have expanded their homes to rent and facilitate students. And we are doing a very poor job of marketing the presence of these foreign universities, these external universities in the country. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that once we have the right solution and we are able to integrate that entire hospital site, and if I may use the language of FDL Consult, into a holistic manner, and if we use a holistic approach, integrate the buildings adequately, Mr. Speaker, then it can be truly utilized for the purposes of university education to great value. I think the time has come for us to begin to explore that potential. I'll tell you why, Mr. Speaker. It's been a long journey, Mr. Speaker. There is a certain nobility and morality that St. Lucians once had. I say once had because I don't see evidence of it. Those were the days when we were proud people. We walked the Caribbean, shoulders held high, and we were happy when people said he was from St. Lucia. That's the minister from St. Lucia who just delivered that speech. These are the things they are doing in St. Lucia. Those are the days, Mr. Speaker. I hope we are rekindling those days. I hope so. I believe so. But we were looked up by the region. As I was saying to somebody recently, you know the only benchmark Ralph Gonzalez uses to measure development in St. Vincent is St. Lucia? And he goes to every meeting and, well, St. Lucia has this, but we did far better than that. We have that. We beat St. Lucia at it. That's the attitude. That's to beat St. Lucia at their own game. And we have lost that, Mr. Speaker. And we therefore have to do some rethinking and recasting. And I say we had this nobility because years ago, we believed that if we allowed these offshore universities to operate in St. Lucia, it would have compromised the University of the West Indies, and we would have placed the University of the West Indies in an invidious position. But what are the lessons? University of the West Indies don't care about you. Yeah, they care about you, they're training your students, but they really don't care about that kind of competition. As a matter of fact, in Trinidad and Tobago, the Trinidad and Tobago government is now thinking of inviting an offshore university or allowing the University of the West Indies to develop offshore credentials for offshore students to come and study in Trinidad as graduates of the University of the West Indies. And you know, all these years, we sat back, we allowed these things to happen in the region because we somehow believed that we had to carry the morality of the region on our shoulders. But you think the region really cared about us? When I look back, I can't think of many occasions when it mattered. We have to start to begin to striking out on our own. We have to. And I'm hoping that coming out of all of this experience of what has happened to St. Jude's, that we can use that experience and build something new, something different for the benefit of the people of St. Lucia and for the country as a whole, Mr. Speaker. I believe it is possible. So as much as we have inherited a disaster, Mr. Speaker, a fiasco, Mr. Speaker, a monumental tragedy, as I described it, because of the sheer cost, financially, emotionally, spiritually, professionally, to the people of St. Lucia, I believe that we can do something different. We have to inherit the mistakes and the errors and turn them around, Mr. Speaker. Now, don't get me wrong, Mr. Speaker, by my moral admonitions. Never get me wrong, Mr. Speaker. Don't ever think, Mr. Speaker, that I don't want to find out where this $118 million went to. Don't think, Mr. Speaker, that I don't want to find out how it is that the foundation of St. Jude Hospital was estimated to cost $3 to $4 million by the Ministry of Infrastructure, yet a contract was awarded for $9 million. What makes you think I don't want to find out? I want to find out about all these things. There are people who will tell you, let the past be the past. Forget the past. But you know what has been our greatest failing as a nation, Mr. Speaker, as a country? We become so ashamed of the past that we don't want to deal with the past. We want to forget the past and we don't want to learn the lessons from the past. That's the reality of our existence, Mr. Speaker. That's the reality of our existence. And so, yes, I want to get an accounting of this 118 million hospital, the 48 million for a ground floor, what the other floors would cost, what the equipment would cost, what would have been the ultimate result. I want to find out all of these things, Mr. Speaker. So don't feel that my suggestion that the mistakes of the past be inherited but be dealt with in an imaginative and innovative way because the people of St. Lucia expect us to correct it means that we forget these things. Not at all, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, I believe that this saga has many lessons for all of us. And while, of course, as I've said, my own the windows are closing, I hope that what happened will never be allowed to happen again, will never be tolerated by the people of St. Lucia. And we have to sharpen our mechanisms to ensure that these things do not happen ever, ever, ever again, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to assure you that I support this resolution. I welcome this resolution before the House. And I believe that the government now has a responsibility to tarry no more. Make sure that the selected project, the selected hospital, be completed in time and before, well before the next general elections of this country. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for your kindness.
The member for Babino.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if there is room after a great man has spoken to add to the discussion. However, I need to inform you, Mr. Speaker, that I was recalled by the Honorable Prime Minister to report for duty, as no one else can represent me in Parliament, because I was the one elected as representative for the constituency of Babino. He gave me a few days vacation and he decided to cut it short. I was wondering whether St. Jude was on fire again. My Prime Minister is a hard taskmaster, but I had no choice but to report for duty. And if I knew I would have spoken at this time, maybe I would have enjoyed the last day of the vacation and come to do my presentation now. Mr. Speaker, I admire the diversity, the uniqueness, the creativity in the team in this government, the strength, the presentations, and the style, because no one can anticipate what any speaker will say in this House. Mr. Speaker, before I discuss the subject at hand, the substantive matter laid in this House by the Honorable Prime Minister and Parliamentary Representative for Castries East, I would like to take leave to wish the people in Babino, the staff of the Ministry of the Public Service, Home Affairs, Labor and Gender Affairs, and all St. Lucians, especially those who serve in the teaching profession, where I gave 34 of the best years of my life. I want to wish all of them a very bright and prosperous new year. Ek mwen vle souhaiter tout jan Babino and tout ti commune Babino bonne l'année et qu'on travaille ensemble pour mener pays ça à devant et pour faire Saint-Lucie en première place pour nous toutes. Jean de Bawa, Bogis de Laguette, Monsiton, Plateau, Pébouche, Gara, Lacroix, Babino Central, Tichimé, Fonasor, Chassin, Talvan, Kakojiwa, Hill 20, Kabish, Balata, Timon, and Union Terrace. Bonne l'année pour toutes. And I wish all my colleagues here and you, Mr. Speaker, all the very best in 2023. Mr. Speaker, I want to express condolences to the many families who have lost loved ones in the last year and those who have lost loved ones even this year. Mr. Speaker, we are people of hope and high aspirations, and I am very confident that 2023 will be much better than 2022 in Babono and the rest of St. Lucia, as we thank the Lord for the breath of life. Mr. Speaker, we are starting 2023 with a bang. Tomorrow, Wednesday, 18th January, with the launch of Nobel Laureate Festival at the Babono Multipurpose Center from 6:30 p.m. This is the first time in the history of Babono that we are hosting such an event. Mr. Speaker, we find this timing to be perfect, as the theme is celebrating excellence, nurturing our creativity, consolidating our legacy. Mr. Speaker, we will profit the opportunity to unveil our plans for Babono and to see what Babono Central will look like as a little town for a one-stop shop for all your needs. Mr. Speaker, as I move quickly to the matter at hand, which speaks to the report on the St. Jude's Hospital reconstruction project, I want to express my sincere gratitude to the staff of St. Jude Hospital for the sacrifices they have made during the last 13 years to provide quality health care to the people, especially those who live in the southern part of the island. I want to thank the people who live in Vieux-Fort North, Vieux-Fort South, Labrie and Choiseul for your patience and tolerance for all these years. Mr. Speaker, as a social scientist and looking at how this motion on the floor affects the lives of human beings, I am very happy that the Honorable Prime Minister is relying on research, data, and facts for us to make informed decisions. We want to know how this report, how the St. Jude's debacle has affected and impacted the lives of the people in St. Lucia. The monies wasted and misused of our national financial, material, and human resources is very critical. I am interested in knowing what could have been salvaged from all the loss that we are talking about. Mr. Speaker, this St. Jude Hospital has nothing to do with horses, which is what confused the last leader and leader of the opposition, who ignored the hospital and focused on horses and horse races in the south of the island. The St. Jude Hospital was destroyed on the 9th of September 2009. And I don't know why we see these nines. 999. And maybe it should have finished in the 9th year. Mr. Speaker, this reconstruction project has been ongoing for the last 13 years. When will we stop this reconstruction and just construct the hospital? It started under the King administration, continued and never stopped under the Kenny administration, and was stopped and destroyed by the Chasney administration. And now, Philip J. Pierre administration will construct and finish this hospital. Amen. Let us finish this hospital. I am pleased to know that the parliamentary representative and senior minister was part of the beginning and will be part of the ending of this episode. The Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. When this St. Jude Hospital was destroyed by fire in 2009, we had many people who donated and gave contributions to construct the hospital, and the senior minister outlined and highlighted the amount of monies that were received in donation. Only to see the then Minister of Economic Development, the minister we describe as Minister of Tooth Bagay, destroyed 2 of the buildings, which cost millions of dollars. I heard it's about $7 million. And I don't know why there's something magic about 7 again, because 7 million was given for vaccines, and we have not received one yet. So they like the odd numbers, 9s and 7s. Mr. Speaker, imagine the poor school children who sacrifice their lunch or their break money to donate towards the reconstruction of the St. Jude Hospital. Their contribution was sent down the drain. Mr. Speaker, I recalled how before the fire, St. Jude Hospital offered advanced medical care from some experts who came to provide the best health care to our people. I also recalled, Mr. Speaker, I used to take my father to St. Jude's Hospital for medical care. Mr. Speaker, in 2016, this hospital was more than 75% complete, as stated in the report. And today, in 2023, we are just about to start the works to complete this hospital. During that time, we saw millions of dollars spent in erecting a box, the famous box, and I quote, so I will not be charged for copyright. I think Honorable Parliamentary Rep for Viewfort has claimed the right to the name box. Erecting a box which St. Lucians were guaranteed by the then Minister for Everything, the Minister Tutbagay, promised to finish long before the last election, which was held on the 26th of July 2021. Mr. Speaker, the then minister also told the people that if the hospital was not completed, they should not re-elect him to office. And the people from Castries Southeast, who were listening attentively, did exactly what he asked them to do, which is they put him out. So now, Mr. Speaker, this government, under the leadership of the parliamentary representative for Castries East, has no choice but to complete the hospital for the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, care is critical for all in this nation. There is a saying that your health is your wealth, and health comes before wealth. And this government will make the sacrifice in putting people first by ensuring that the St. Jude Hospital is completed. Therefore, I am appealing to all St. Lucians that some things will have to wait. It is best you are healthy rather than being sick and have nice roads and beautiful houses and expensive houses and nice clothes and jewelry. Your health is more precious than any of these things. What will it profit a man to have all his riches and has lost his health? So we begin to see the value of health and why the St. Jude Hospital is critical for the health of this nation. Mr. Speaker, I am confident that this administration, under the leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister, will do the magic. I think last year he did it. I don't know how it worked, but he kept the country afloat financially and find the money to complete the St. Jude Hospital. I do not want to go into details about what is there to be done because I have had the opportunity to visit St. Jude construction site twice. The first visit was to have a look at the state in which the hospital was left by the last administration. Mr. Speaker, what I saw brought tears to my eyes. I saw the abandoned hospital occupied by bats, and everything was in a mess. I could not believe what I had seen. Then I visited the box, which should have been completed before the last election. And it was just a frame with some metal frames that were erected to form partitions for different sections. What a disaster. Mr. Speaker, what struck me was the second visit, which happened to be an impromptu visit. I was in Viewfort with the Prime Minister towards the end of last year, where he signed an MOU with NIPRO to conduct major repairs to the Viewfort Southern Divisional Headquarters. And then he indicated that he was going to visit the St. Jude Hospital. I immediately agreed to tag along with him to make my eyes cook my peas. Mr. Speaker, you should have seen the dismay and amazement expressed by the Prime Minister. He could not believe what he had seen. The Cabinet of Ministers had given directives to clean the original St. Jude Hospital. And what I saw was unbelievable. The bats were gone, and all the buildings were cleaned, ready for completion. The Prime Minister actually raised his hand in the air. He put his hand on his head, and he asked, what was going through the minds of these leaders who were elected by the people in the last administration to govern this country? He could not believe when he saw the building. And having seen the building before, Mr. Speaker, I personally could not understand what had happened because the concrete was the same way, the first coat was the same way, everything looked like it's just a building, they just finished work on it the day before. And it was just clean. Mr. Speaker, I can say now, all I can say now is keep it simple and to the point, and let us complete the hospital. What I remember during the last Calypso season, when young Calypsonian Desmond Long, sang the saints were called to save St. Jude. And this resonated with me as I say, Saint Philip and all his other saints have to save St. Jude. Among us, Mr. Speaker, we have Moses, who liberated the people from Israel. We have King that will reign from the beginning to the end. We have Kenny, who continued and never stopped. Sean, that will shine light by educating our people on the value of good health in schools. prosper, who will bring prosperity with the healthy foods and food security. And Jeremiah, who understands accident and emergency and differently able. Kenson, with the sprinters who will help us reach the finishing line. And the list goes on, as every single minister and parliamentarian in this government has something to bring to the table to finish St. Jude Hospital. I ask the Lord's strength and courage to do what is best for our people by putting them first. Given the tough economic challenges ahead, this government, under the stern leadership of the Honorable Parliamentary Rep for Castries East and Honorable Prime Minister, I give my full support to this motion and endorse the report and its recommendations to complete the St. Jude Hospital for improved quality health care for all St. Lucians. Mr. Speaker, the wastage of money on this St. Jude Hospital has created a dent in the purse of this government. The money that was wasted on St. Jude, Mr. Speaker, could have gone towards education. The government is investing a lot in education. That money could have gone to help improve primary health care. We have many health centers that need assistance. All that money that was wasted in St. Jude. We have several hospitals that need care, attention. We have so many people who apply for medical assistance to go to Martinique, to go to Barbados, to go to Trinidad, to go to the USA. Mr. Speaker, we have the roads. Everybody complaining about holes in the road. But they did not see the holes that were created in the purse in St. Lucia by wasting so much money on St. Jude. And we still have not completed the hospital. Transportation is a challenge. Employment, especially for our young people. We have electricity. People are calling for utility poles, they need lights, the place is dark. Mr. Speaker, we need that money to make life better for St. Lucians. Persons who have not had water, pipe-borne water. We need quality food and nutrition. The cost of living is going up. Everybody wants an extra dollar to buy the food to take care of themselves. But yet, we saw money wasted on St. Jude. Safety and security. Part of that money that was wasted should have gone to train the police and the protective services. Government has to find money to do that. Yet, so much money was wasted, and we still do not have a hospital yet. We need to protect the environment. We need to improve the living standards and improve the quality of life for every St. Lucian. And then people will say, it's okay. It cannot be okay. We will finish the hospital, but we still have to get to the bottom of this challenge. Mr. Speaker, when you look at the report, and we speak to all the equipment and everything that was purchased to finish that hospital, where are these things? Or could these things be salvaged or sold and use that money for a different purpose while we wait to finish the hospital? When we visited the St. Jude Hospital, the second visit, I saw some equipment there, they were rusty. They couldn't be used again. And that must have cost millions of dollars. Mr. Speaker, I heard the discussion around what has happened to the south of the island. And I think, Mr. Speaker, as we speak of St. Jude, there are plans afoot by this government, not just to address St. Jude, but other issues that are affecting the people in the south of the island. And the Prime Minister has given directive to my ministry to create or find a space to provide some government services to the people in the south. The people, the employees in the Department of the Public Service are already working on this. We have started discussion with the parliamentary representative in Vieux-Fort South. Well, we have parliamentary representative from Vieux-Fort North. We have parliamentary representative from Labrie. All those living in the south will be part of the discussion. And we have identified a space where we are going to bring quite a few government services to the people in the south. One of them, we have already ordered the equipment to produce passports so that people from the south will not have to come to Castries every time they need a passport. So that we have already earmarked the funds for, we have costed it, and we are in the process of purchasing it. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has signed an MOU to improve the Southern Divisional Headquarters for the police. The last government was busy destroying, and this government is busy building. We have to build a custody suite that was destroyed by the last government. We have to build a police headquarters. We have to build a fire headquarters. We have to build a hall of justice. And the list goes on and on and on. Mr. Speaker, you have heard the story about the Orange Grove Plaza that will cost government an arm and a leg. All government departments now are complaining about mold in the buildings where they work. Government has to find new spaces for rental. They have to do air quality treatment and cleaning on a regular basis that costs millions of dollars. So we are saying we are doing things, Mr. Speaker, not just about St. Jude, but trying to improve the quality of life and health for every St. Lucian. Mr. Speaker, when I look at this report, I see it as a phase one. I say it as a phase one because we need some further investigation. That investigation must continue so we can locate where the approximate $98 million of equipment that was already on site or on stream or somewhere. We need to know where they are, so we can account to the St. Lucians where the money gone. Where is the money? We need it. I don't know how much my fellow colleagues need, but I need quite a bit for Babono. So once the Prime Minister recovers some, so I can ask him for a little bit for my constituency, because the cries come on a daily basis. So, Mr. Speaker, I give my full support to this motion that this government, this parliament, give the blessings so this government can move expeditiously so that we can complete this hospital and bring an end to this episode of St. Jude. I want to thank the members of the committee who worked tirelessly to deliver this report, which has mapped the way forward to propel action with earnest to bring closure to this chapter in the history of this administration. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your patience and understanding, and for listening and giving your undivided attention to all the teachers in this house. Because when we speak here, you are listening. When I say teachers in this house, as you remain, with all due respect, the principal in this honorable house, where the decisions we make impact the lives of thousands of people far and near. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this House stands suspended until 8:15.
Honourable members, the question is that this House stands suspended until 8:15. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. House suspended.
All right.
Well, eh bien, nous venons au bout ça c'est deuxième session après déjeuner. Kaila, ça j'ai demandé pour un petit moment pour continuer. Car aller bientôt à présent, nous allons continuer après 8 heures. Mais durant session ça là, nous avons parole par moun qui fait différents membres parlement à cette session là. Quand il m'a dit nous tenons parole après premier ministre parler bon matin, nous tenons ça c'est honorable Joachim Henry, c'est lui qui commençait avant. Après Joachim Henry qui a représenté Sud-Est, nous tenons honorable Alfred Prosper Denry South. Après, nous avons une contribution par honorable Win Girard qui a représenté Lanslawé et puis Canary. Et puis nous avons honorable Bradley Felix qui parlait aussi, qui a représenté à sa façade d'opposition, il a représenté Saint-Soisey avec Saltibis, avec aussi nous avons après honorable Bradley Felix. Nous avons honorable Kenson Casimir qui parlait aussi, qui a représenté Gozile. Avec après honorable Kenson Casimir, nous avons Dr. Kenny Anthony. Ancien monde, Dr. Anthony, c'est seul monde qui t'a parlé. Avec qui joue plus de temps, puisqu'il t'a parlé au fond de chez, puisqu'il sa situation Saint-Jude qui a affecté un pile. Après, Dr. Kenny Anthony parlait. Et comment dit Dr. Anthony, j'ai l'histoire à cette situation, comme c'est lui qui était Premier ministre, moi, pour c'est un thème. Après Dr. Kenny Anthony, nous avons aussi Dr. Virginia Albert Poyot qui a représenté Babuno, qui a fini comme contribution avec à l'est là, j'ai décidé de prendre une petite pause avec nous dévirer à Yonka après 8 heures. Winston?
Thank you. The motion before the House is that Parliament do advise the Cabinet Ministers or the Cabinet of Ministers to consider and approve the recommendations presented by the Review Committee for the completion and commissioning of the St. Jude Hospital to facilitate the move and transfer of operations from the George Odlum National Stadium, that's in the south of the island, Vieux-Fort South, to the original St. Jude Hospital site. The debate continued this afternoon, and we heard from the Honorable Alfred Prosper of Denry South, Wayne Girard of Ancillary Canaries, Kenson Casimir representing Grosile, Bradley Felix, the representative for Choiseul, that is, Dr. Kenny Anthony, the representative for Vieux-Fort South, and lastly, Virginia Albert Poyot, the representative for Babono. We are yet to hear from the representative for Castries South, who is the Deputy Prime Minister, and importantly, the Minister of Health, the leader of the opposition, who was the then Prime Minister when the St. Jude Hospital saga took a turn in many directions. We are yet to hear from him. We are yet to hear from the representative for Castries Central. We are due to back here at 8:15 to continue discussing and debating this motion. Until such time, we send you back to master control.